Chapter 3197. Just as both of them were determined to work together, Du Ying's voice came from outside. Saint, there's a young masterly Xinghe at the foot of the mountain who wishes to see you. Chu Li frowned. He's quite fast. Sun Mingyue said, invite him in. Yes. Du Ying responded and left. This Li Xinghe is a powerful figure, isn't he? Sun Mingyue gracefully sat behind the long table and put on a white veil to cover her beautiful face, revealing only her limpid eyes that were captivating. Chu Li nodded. It should be the stargazing pavilion's words. You have the right to pretend you didn't hear their nasty words. Chu Li frowned. So extreme? For the sake of the bigger picture, you have to bear with it even if you're mistreated. Sun Mingyue said, Priest Lu and Dharma King have good tempers, but you're too impulsive. Don't ruin our plan. All right. Chu Li slowly nodded. Sun Mingyue waved her hand. That's settled then. Go rest in the spirit medicine nursery. Chu Li Fizz saluted and left. Chu Li refined 2 furnaces of pills in the spirit medicine nursery, and 3 days passed. He was about to refine another furnace of pills when Du Ying fluttered over and invited him to the Divine Light Basilica. In the Divine Light Palace, Lu Qinyu and Fang Xingyang were both seated in a row of armchairs to the right of Sun Mingyue. On the armchairs on the other side, 4 young girls in green robes sat quietly, their postures elegant and dignified. Chu Li's gaze uncontrollably drifted over and sized up the 4 of them. The 4 young ladies in green looked exactly the same as if they were carved from the same mold. Their height and weight were identical as well. Chu Li's omniscient mirror could observe down to the smallest detail, and he could tell that something was amiss, but it was difficult for ordinary people. Chu Li's gaze roamed over their faces, and the 4 ladies immediately glared at him. They all had oval faces, curved eyebrows, cherry lips, and fine noses. Their facial features were exquisite and beautiful, making them pitiful. However, their gazes were unusually fierce. When they looked over, Chu Li felt as if 8 cold knives were cutting his face. How dare you? The last young lady in green shouted and suddenly slapped him. Chu Li took a step back and dodged the slap easily. How dare you? The last young lady in green shouted and slapped him again. Chu Li took another step back to avoid the attack. Sun Mingyue coughed lightly and said indifferently, Holy King Zhao, you've been rude. Chu Li calmly gave a fist salute. Greetings, Saint. Who are these 4 ladies? The 2 green-robed girls' attacks failed, so they glared at him angrily. The other 2 girls looked at him indifferently. Their gazes roamed around his body like the tip of a sword, trying to probe him. Chu Li stood there in a relaxed manner. There was not a single hole in his body. This made the 2 women frown inwardly. They didn't expect to run into a sword master. Senior Sister Qiu, Senior Sister Dong, he Zhao De, Zhao Fuwang, Sun Mingyue said. She then said to Chu Li, the 4 senior sisters from the White Lotus Palace are here to help. Mei Chunmei, Xiao Meiqiu, Mei Dong, don't be rude. Chu Li gave a fist salute. Ah, so it's the heroine of the Rosy Palace. I apologize for my lack of manners. The 4 women stared at him without blinking. Saintess, young Master Li is here. Du Ying's voice came from outside. Chapter 3198. Young Master Li, please come in, Sun Mingyue said plainly. She was secretly furious, but as the saint, she could only hold it in for now, lest she ruin the plan. Chu Li took a step forward and scoffed. Young Master Li, this isn't Stargazing Pavilion. A blue silhouette flashed, and Li Xinghe appeared in the basilica. He gave Sun Mingyue a fist salute and chuckled. Please don't be offended if I've been rude, Saint. I've always been like this, and I can't change this habit, even in Stargazing Pavilion. He then looked at the 4 women from the church and gave them a fist salute. Ladies, I, Li Xinghe, am pleased to meet you. As expected of a disciple of the church, it's no exaggeration to say that you're an outstanding beauty. Mei Chun and the other 3 women glared at him coldly. Lecher, Xia Dong scoffed and suddenly swung his palm in the same manner as when he was dealing with Chu Li. Li Xinghe extended his palm and slapped it lightly, silently dispersing the palm energy, demonstrating his fine control over his inner energy. The four women narrowed their eyes slightly and felt a chill in their hearts. Li Xinghe did not even look at Chu Li. He spoke to Sun Mingyue and the four women, ignoring Chu Li as if he did not exist. He also ignored Fang Qingyang and Lu Qinyu. As soon as he stepped into the Divine Light Basilica, he overshadowed Chu Li and the other three men. He behaved elegantly and calmly with the demeanor of a master, overshadowing Chu Li and the other two men. Sun Mingyue nodded. Young Master Li, you've come at the right time. The four senior sisters from the Church of the Divine Blood are here to help. Have you deduced that the masters from the Church of the Divine Blood have entered the Li dynasty? They're already lying in ambush near the Great Light Peak and are preparing to deal with the disciples of the Holy Church of Light. It's best to act as soon as possible to prevent the disciples from being harmed. Li Xinghe said seriously. Can you accurately deduce their location? Sun Mingyue asked seriously. Of course. Li Xinghe smiled proudly. I'll lead the way. Everyone, let's go together. Thank you, young Master Li, Sun Mingyue said. Li Xinghe stood up and walked out. Sun Mingyue got up and walked down the stairs. She arrived in front of Mei Chun and the other three girls. She extended her hand in invitation. The four women stood up gracefully and walked out with Sun Mingyue. Chu Li and the other two were the last to leave. Fang Qingyang gave Chu Li a look, signaling him to be patient and bear with it. Chu Li took a deep breath and nodded slowly. If he couldn't control himself now, he would be ignoring the bigger picture. No matter how much Sun Mingyue tolerated him, she wouldn't let him off easily. Li Xinghe had made use of this point to humiliate him. This debt could be settled in the future. Chu Li secretly thought about how he could find an opportunity to teach Li Xinghe a lesson and let him know how powerful he was. However, they were currently in a period of cooperation, so he needed Li Xinghe to predict and could not make a move. The 9 of them glided down the Great Light Peak and ran for hundreds of miles before they stopped in front of a peach blossom forest. Li Xinghe turned his head and said, Saintess, there are 6 of them. If we go over with so many people, they will probably run away. Sun Mingyue looked at him with a frown. Chu Li said, The masters from the Church of the Divine Blood are very brave. They won't run away. There's no harm in being careful. Li Xinghe didn't even look at him as he continued to look at Sun Mingyue. Actually, it's best to send someone over first to lure them into making a move before we rush over. Chu Li did not wait for him to point out who it was. Instead, he said, Saint, I'm afraid it's the 6 fellows who were chasing after me. I'll go and keep them busy. Sun Mingyue looked at Li Xinghe. Li Xinghe chuckled and said, They're the 6 masters who were chasing after Brother Zhao earlier. Can Brother Zhao handle them alone? Don't hurt yourself. Chu Li smiled faintly. I really can't do it alone. Young Master Li, let's go together. Me? Li Xinghe was stunned. Chu Li said, When I was dealing with them with young Master Li earlier, young Master Li escaped first and left me behind to bring up the rear. You won't run away this time and leave me behind, will you? All right. Then we'll deal with these 6 fellows for a while. You guys can come later. Li Xinghe noticed that Sun Mingyue's gaze was strange. He coughed softly and said, Everyone, you must be careful of these people. Be especially careful of the Blood God's disintegration technique. Chu Li said, Young Master Li, please lead the way. Li Xinghe smiled at Sun Mingyue and the 4 ladies before he turned to leave. Follow me. Chu Li followed Li Xinghe and rushed out. Lu Qinyu smiled. This young Master Li from Stargazing Pavilion is quite capable, but he's still too young. Fang Qingyang shook his head. He could not stand Li Xinghe and smiled. Given Priest Zhao's temper, it's rare for him to be able to hold it in. Sun Mingyue glared at the 2 of them. Mei Chun and the other ladies did not even look at them. Lu Qinyu and Fang Qingyang understood Sun Mingyue's gaze and quickly shut their mouths. Fang Qingyang said, Saint, Priest Lu and I will go too. All right, go ahead. Sun Mingyue waved her hand. The 2 of them rushed out and chased after Li Xinghe and Chu Li. They soon caught up to them. Chu Li did not reject them when he saw that they were following him. He told them in a low voice about the Church of the Divine Blood's Masters techniques, especially the Blood God's finger and how they should deal with it. As soon as the 4 of them walked out of the peach blossom forest, A whistling sound could be heard as a finger force formed a net and shrouded them. Chu Li waved his fist and shouted, "Charge!" Li Xinghe's blue robe fluttered as he launched palm after palm in an endless stream. His small star palm was firm and pure, and the palm forces overlapped to form a shield to block the blood god's finger. Lu Qinyu and Chu Li had already received the warning. Like Chu Li, they continued to launch their fists while their bodies followed the fist force and charged forward. Their fist forces blocked in front of them and became extremely firm after layers of overlapping. This was the wonder of the divine light fist. Although it was the first time the three of them had worked together, they were well coordinated. Their fist forces overlapped to form a mountain of fists in front of them. Li Xinghe chuckled and disappeared in a flash. He appeared on a treetop in the distance and looked down at them fighting. Chu Li turned his head and ignored him. The three of them immediately fell into a tough battle. Although the Sixth Church of the Divine Blood's Masters were weaker than Chu Li, they were stronger than Fang Qingyang and the others. One of them could suppress them to the point of suffocation. Now that two of them were attacking them at the same time, they were soon in danger. Chu Li was not at a disadvantage, even though he was fighting two people at the same time. He shouted, "Young Master Li, are you going to watch us die? Your Holy Church of Light's priest is too weak." Li Xinghe shook his head disapprovingly and launched two small star palms. A ray of starlight fell from the sky and condensed into the small star palm. It did not loosen due to the distance, but was still firm and pure. Its power did not diminish, causing the Church of the Divine Blood's Masters to take a step back in fear. Lu Qinyu and Fang Qingyang immediately heaved a sigh of relief. Brother Zhao, put in more effort to eliminate them so that the saint doesn't have to do anything, Li Xinghe said with a smile. Chu Li was filled with rage, but he suppressed it forcefully. He could not bear to wait until they had cooperated. He had to find a chance to settle the score with them first. The round-faced elder frowned and scoffed. "The saint of the Holy Church of Light? I'd like to see her for myself." Chu Li said coldly, "How arrogant." These 6 people obviously did not take the Holy Church of Light seriously. Even though they knew it was a trap, they did not care and were eager to make a move. Another Church of the Divine Blood's Master laughed. "I heard that the saint of the Holy Church of Light is a great beauty. Wouldn't it be great if we could capture her?" "Ha!" The other 5 elders laughed. Lu Qinyu's expression darkened, while Fang Qingyang flew into a rage. "You're courting death." His figure suddenly sped up, drifting unpredictably like a ghost. Chapter 3199. Chu Li yelled, "Priest King, don't fall for it." Fang Qingyang knew that they were trying to provoke him, but he could not control himself. He had always regarded the saint as his god and would never tolerate anyone insulting her. Chu Li shook his head helplessly. They're just trying to vent their anger. They wouldn't even dare to make a sound when the saint is right in front of them. "Priest King, why bother with them? They're just clowns." Fang Qingyang scoffed. "I won't forgive them for insulting the saint like this." He moved like a ghost and threw 3 punches in the time it took for him to finish a sentence. Bam, 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 as he clashed with his opponent. His movements became faster and faster as he used his opponent's palm energy to activate his light body technique. Li Xinghe clapped and laughed. "Great martial arts indeed. You're indeed a priest from the Holy Church of Light." Chu Li lifted his head and glared at Li Xinghe. "Young Master Li, you're too much. Is this how the Stargazing Pavilion supports us? Are you just watching from the sidelines and making sarcastic remarks?" He handled the 2 Church of Divine Blood Masters with ease, but had no intention of supporting Lu Qinyu and Fang Qingyang. Although they were in a precarious situation, they did not use their last resort or ordinary secret skills, let alone the secret skill of great light. As a priest, they knew more secret skills and had endless tricks up their sleeves. This was definitely not their only trick. They might be numbing their opponents or figuring out their tricks to deal a fatal blow. Li Xinghe laughed. "I don't have to fight against such a small opponent. If 6 Church of Divine Blood Masters can't stop them, then the Holy Church of Light should just surrender. There's no need to resist anymore. If the Stargazing Pavilion is helping us like this, Surrendering to the Church of Divine Blood might be a way out, Chu Li said coldly. Li Xinghe smiled and shook his head. Do you think you can live by surrendering? Their blood dragon pool is formed from the blood essence of grandmasters. Masters like you are their favorite to kill. They prefer your blood essence more than the Holy Church of Light. Chu Li said, We won't survive if the stargazing pavilion supports us like this. Young Master Li, don't blame us for being rude. How rude? Li Xinghe chuckled and said nonchalantly, Are you going to fight me? Even if I can't handle you, the saint can. Chu Li said, How about we kill you and blame it on the Church of Divine Blood? Does young Master Li think we can't do it? He narrowed his eyes and looked at Li Xinghe indifferently. You really are ruthless. Li Xinghe shook his head with a smile and said, All right, then I'll come down and help. He pretended to be indifferent, but deep down he was in awe. He could feel Chu Li's murderous intent. It was not a child's play. It seemed that Chu Li was very angry with him and was afraid of Sun Mingyue's martial arts. If he provoked them, there was nothing they wouldn't do. He floated to Lu Qinyu's side, and the situation immediately changed. Lu Qinyu was able to catch his breath, and Li Xinghe vented his anger on the experts of the Divine Blood Church. The lesser heavenly star palm force was endless as it suppressed the divine blood finger and pressed forward. Chu Li also increased his strength, pressuring the two masters from the Church of the Divine Blood so much that they could not breathe. Bang! He suddenly disappeared from where he was like a ghost and reappeared behind another expert from the Church of the Divine Blood. The divine light fist sent the old man flying with a dull thud that shook everyone's soul. Chu Li threw another punch without hesitation. Bam! The old man took another punch in the air and retreated even faster. You're courting death. The other old man snorted angrily. His body suddenly shrunk, turning from a slightly plump figure to as thin as a bamboo pole. His martial arts suddenly increased, and his speed increased by 30 to 40%. He appeared in front of Chu Li in an instant, and his palm that had a layer of rouge on it hit Chu Li's chest. Chu Li was sent flying. Bam! He threw two punches in the air. One was aimed at the old man who had caught up to him, and the other was aimed at the other old man. He blocked their attacks, and they did not continue to chase after him. The tip of his toes touched a pine tree, and the pine tree snapped with a crack. He then floated toward the thin old man who was charging at him. The thin old man unleashed a secret skill. Under the omniscient mirror, the vigor around his body was so intense that it was like a raging flame. Chu Li scoffed and threw another two punches, blocking the thin old man's footsteps. Although the thin old man was faster and stronger, Chu Li could always interrupt his movements. It was as if he was stuck on the old and new points of force in his movements. This made the old man extremely uncomfortable, and he was so frustrated that he wanted to shout. Li Xinghe raised his voice. Brother Zhao, are you all right? I won't die. Chu Li scoffed. Li Xinghe smiled. Don't underestimate their secret skill. The most powerful one is the blood god's disintegration. You must be careful. Chu Li replied. I know. The 10 of them were in a stalemate. Although Chu Li had been hit by a palm and was injured, and there was blood at the corner of his mouth, he could still hold on. The same went for the other 3. It was difficult to kill the people from the Church of the Divine Blood, and the Church of the Divine Blood could not kill them. Oomph! The short and round old man suddenly scoffed. Use your secret skill and get rid of them. All right, everyone responded. Suddenly, the 6 old men became skinny and moved at lightning speed. Their finger energy and palm energy were 30 to 40% stronger, and they instantly pressured Chu Li and the others to the point where they could not breathe. The situation was once again precarious. Although Chu Li was pressured to the point where he could not breathe, he had no intention of using his secret skill. He raised his voice and said, Young Master Li, is this all you're capable of? Where's the secret skill of Stargazing Pavilion? Li Xinghe scoffed. It's useless even if I use my secret skill. How can it compare to their blood god's disintegration? He had his reservations. Once he used his secret skill and forced these people to fight for their lives, they would definitely use the blood god's disintegration, and he would be the unlucky one. What a bunch of trash. A delicate voice was heard. Sun Mingwei and the 4 women from the royal palace fluttered out. Mei Dong laughed coldly when she saw the situation and scolded in disdain. Chu Li glanced at her without saying a word. What are you looking at? You're all trash. Mei Dong said in disdain. Move. All of you move. Chu Li fluttered and retreated. Li Xinghe, Lu Chenyu, and Fang Qingyang retreated as well. The 6 old men from the Church of the Divine Blood frowned as they glared at Mei Chun and the other 3 women. Why are you from the royal palace here? You sure have your hands on us. The short and round old man frowned in dissatisfaction. Are you guys trying to pick a fight? Mei Dong pointed at the 6 of them with her slender fingers and scoffed. The royal palace has friendly relations with the Holy Church of Light. If you know what's good for you, get lost. Otherwise, we'll chop off your heads and kick them around like balls. The round-faced old man frowned. If you people from the royal palace don't know what's good for you, don't blame us for being impolite. Chu Li slowly walked to Sun Mingwei's side. Sun Mingwei gave him a sidelong glance and shook her head, signaling him not to speak. Chu Li looked helpless. All right, let's see how you're going to be impolite. Mei Dong scoffed and turned her head. Big sister, are you going to fight them? Punish them? Benzene-inducing Salatra, do it, Mei Chun said with a cold expression. The 4 women immediately turned into 4 white shadows and unsheathed their swords from their waists. The sword flashes were like waterfalls as the 4 sword flashes combined to form a halo that trapped the 6 old men. You're courting death, the short and round old man said coldly. There's no need to hold back. Kill them. The 6 old men immediately pointed their fingers, and the Church of the Divine Blood's power weaved a net that enveloped them tightly. Ding, 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 ding. The continuous sound of metal clashing rang out like rain falling on banana leaves. It was the result of the finger force hitting the swords. Chu Li turned his head and asked, The saint isn't going to make a move? Let's wait and see, Sun Mingwei said. Are you injured? Chu Li nodded. Sun Mingwei frowned as she looked at him. Chapter 3200. Chu Li turned to look at the 4 women from the White Lotus Palace. Mei Chun and the other 3 women had bad personalities. They were cold and arrogant, but their swordsmanship was really good. The 4 of them seemed to be connected as if they were one person. Their sword lights were connected to each other, forming a round halo that trapped the 6 masters of the Divine Blood Church. The halo was getting tighter and tighter, and the space for the 6 old men to move was getting narrower and narrower. They were like insects that had been entangled by a spider. Chu Li sighed in admiration and shook his head. It seemed like the Church of the Divine Blood did not take the Holy Church of Light seriously at all. How could these masters do anything to the Holy Church of Light? Even without the help of the White Lotus Palace, he and Sun Mingwei were enough to get rid of these 6 people. Mei Chun and the other 3 women revealed a smile on their cold faces. The 6 people from the Divine Blood Church had less and less room to struggle. They were about to be killed. Bang, bang. Suddenly, 2 muffled sounds rang out, and 2 clouds of blood mist exploded, spreading out and enveloping the surroundings, including the 4 women. The waterfall-like sword technique suddenly stagnated. The 6 masters of the Divine Blood Church took the opportunity to attack the sword formation. Sun Mingwei moved and was about to make a move. Chu Li suddenly moved his body to block her. Sun Mingwei was stunned. She could not help but stop moving and frowned at Chu Li. Chu Li shook his head and said nothing. Sun Mingwei slowed down and attacked again, but she missed the opportunity. The 6 masters of the Divine Blood Church turned into 6 streaks of bloodlight and disappeared in the blink of an eye. Even though Sun Mingwei's light body technique was top-notch, she could not catch up to them. Damn it! Mei Dong stomped her foot in anger. She looked down at her sword, but it was already rusty. The other 3 women also frowned as they looked at their swords. There was a layer of rust on their swords. Blood God disintegration technique, Mei Chun said lightly. What a pity. Chu Li frowned and said, I thought that the Blood God's disintegration technique was a technique that would perish together with the enemy. I didn't expect them to be fine. Are you all right? Li Xinghe snorted and pursed his lips. They used the sanguine escape and their martial arts will be crippled when they return. How can they be considered unscathed? Chu Li said, even if I'm crippled of my martial arts, I can always cultivate it back. It's still better than losing my life. It seems like this blood god disintegration technique is indeed mysterious. The blood god escape is even more powerful, Li Xing has said. Once it's used, it's almost impossible to catch up. Chu Li nodded. Shut up, Mei Dong shouted. She turned her head and stared at them coldly. Her gaze was as sharp as a knife. Why are you so talkative? Gong Lu Chengshi wasn't able to make those 6 fellows stay and let them escape forcefully. This made her extremely resentful, and when she heard Li Xinghe's words, she couldn't help but get angry. Li Xinghe frowned and was about to flare up. He was also the favored one in the stargazing pavilion. Even the elders looked up to him and spoke in an amiable tone. Although the White Palace was strong, it was not as strong as the stargazing pavilion. However, with his status, he had to endure the insults from the disciples of the White Palace. Chu Li's omniscient mirror had been observing everyone's expressions. Although he could not see Li Xinghe's inner thoughts, he could guess from his subtle expressions that he was about to explode. However, with the current situation, he could not let the stargazing pavilion and the Virgin Palace fight each other. Otherwise, the Holy Church of Light would lose its support if they were to exhaust each other. The reason why he showed weakness earlier was to let the Virgin Palace know that the Holy Church of Light was not strong enough and that they needed to send more people over. If they were to cause a ruckus with the stargazing pavilion and both of them withdrew their hands out of anger, the Holy Church of Light would be the unlucky one. These thousands of thoughts flashed through his mind. He immediately took a step forward and shouted at Mei Dong in a deep voice, "Shut up!" Mei Dong looked at him in shock. The other 3 women stared at him coldly as well. Chu Li shouted, "I was wondering how powerful the disciples of the Virgin Palace were. You let them go, and yet you still have the guts to act so arrogantly. How shameless!" "What did you say?" Mei Dong gritted her teeth and questioned him slowly. Her gaze seemed to pierce through him. Chu Li sneered arrogantly. "I thought the disciples of the Virgin Palace were powerful. Now that I've seen them, they're nothing more than this. It's not worth it for me to swallow my anger like this." "Bastard!" Mei Dong snorted angrily. She pulled out her sword and thrust it forward. The rusty long sword turned into a red light and shot toward Chu Li. Chu Li bent his finger and gently flicked it. Ding! The sword suddenly broke. Mei Dong's movement was sluggish. She took a step back and looked at her broken sword. She stared at Chu Li in shock. She was not shocked that Chu Li could break the sword. She was shocked at the force that came from the sword. It was pure and fierce. It had penetrated into her internal organs. If it was not for her virgin heart meridian, she would have suffered. Mei Dong gritted her teeth and stared at him. Chu Li said lightly, "Thank you for letting me win. Do you think you broke the sword?" Mei Dong sneered and said, "This was caused by the disintegration of divine blood technique. If you can survive the disintegration of divine blood technique, you'll be considered powerful." Chu Li said, "The disintegration of divine blood technique is nothing more than this. You disciples of the Virgin Palace are too weak." "Do you dare to say that again?" Mei Dong gritted her teeth and said word by word. Chu Li said lightly, "Your martial arts are too weak. You're a disgrace to the reputation of the Virgin Palace." "All right, I'd like to see your martial arts." Mei Dong snorted angrily. "But we've always fought together." "All right, let's bar then." Chu Li scoffed. "Priest Xiao." Sun Minghua frowned and said coldly, "What nonsense are you spouting?" Chu Li said, "Saint, if they're really capable, I'll accept that they're tyrannical. But I'm not convinced that they're only capable of this much despite their bad temper. Miss Mei and the others are being too polite." Sun Minghua scoffed. "How can they mess around?" Chu Li kept quiet. Mei Dong gritted her teeth and said, "Saint, you don't have to say anything else. We have to teach him a lesson. Sai, he has such a bad temper. You don't have to lower yourselves to his level," Sun Minghua said. Mei Dong scoffed. "He won't be convinced if we don't teach him a lesson." Chu Li said calmly, "That's right." Mei Dong yelled and turned into a white shadow. Then, the 4 women surrounded Chu Li. Mei Dong suddenly appeared next to Fang Qingyang. She pulled out his sword and returned to attack Chu Li with the three women. The sword light turned into a dark red halo that enveloped Chu Li. Chu Li unsheathed his sword and swung it to meet the attack. Ding, ding, ding. He was using the divine light sword. Sun Minghua looked at Chu Li's sword technique in shock. Of course, she had learned the divine light sword technique. However, she rarely used it because her mastery of it was very ordinary. In her eyes, the power of the divine light sword technique was ordinary and far inferior to the divine light fist. Moreover, it was not as convenient. However, the divine light sword technique in Chu Li's hands was exquisite, perfectly meeting the four women's swords. Amidst the clear sound, Chu Li met the four swords with one sword. However, he did it with ease, suppressing the four women's sharp sword techniques. The sword light formed a circle that grew larger and larger. Then, it dispersed and lost all its power. Mei Chun and the other three women were furious and shocked. They looked down on the martial arts world of the Li dynasty and the Holy Church of Light. However, because the Holy Church of Light had connections with the White Palace and Sun Mingyue was a master who was superior to them, they would not come to help. They did not expect such a powerful master like Chu Li to exist. They could not accept it. Chu Li suddenly sped up. The sword light intensified and pierced their wrists. Clang! The three swords fell to the ground, broken into two. Chu Li sheathed his sword and said, "Thank you for letting me win." Chapter 32:01. Everyone was stunned, and the place fell silent. The air seemed to have frozen as a gentle breeze blew past. They did not move. Chu Li smiled at the four ladies, as if waiting for them to speak. Sun Mingyue frowned in silence. Lu Chenyu shook his head. Fang Qingyang opened his mouth to cheer, but held it in. Li Xinghe stared at Chu Li. Finally, their gazes fell on the four ladies of the palace to see how they would react. Mei Chun took a deep breath and said slowly, "Great swordsmanship. I didn't expect the divine light sword to be so exquisite. I'm impressed." Chu Li gave a fist salute and smiled. "Miss Mei, you flatter me." Mei Chun glanced at Mei Dong and shook her head with a sigh. "Little sister knows that there's always someone better out there." Mei Dong scoffed and pouted her delicate red lips. She rolled her eyes at Chu Li, but did not say a word. Chu Li said, "It was just luck." "Hypocrite." Mei Dong scoffed and glared at him. "A win is a win. Don't talk about luck. It's no big deal that we're not as skilled as them. We'll deal with you in the future." "Little sister." Mei Chun scoffed. Mei Dong shut her mouth and turned her head away from Chu Li. Sun Mingyue said, "Let's go back and talk." "Zhao Ade, are you hurt?" Chu Li wiped the dried blood from the corner of his mouth. "I'm fine. Go back and heal yourself. They'll come again." Sun Mingyue scoffed. "It won't be the 6 of them next time. There'll be more powerful masters." Chu Li nodded. "Even if there are more powerful masters, we'll be in trouble. Saint, you should ask for help from the palace." Mei Dong was about to yell. Mei Chun waved her hand to stop her and nodded. "Priest Zhao is right. We'll ask the palace lord for help and ask for more powerful masters." Chu Li smiled and nodded. "Thank you. You leave first." Sun Mingyue scoffed. Chu Li gave a fist salute and glided away. Li Xinghe watched as his silhouette disappeared and said with a smile, "This priest Zhao is really interesting. He's very secretive." Sun Mingyue gave him a deep look. "You too, young masterly." Li Xinghe was slightly apprehensive. Her eyes that were as clear as spring water seemed to see through his innards and even all the secrets in his heart. He felt that all of his thoughts were exposed to her gaze. He chuckled and said, "Saintess, you flatter me. I'll take my leave then." Sun Mingyue said, "Young masterly, you've seen it. We can't stop the Church of the Divine Blood with just these people. I hope that you can send more people over." "This." Li Xinghe hesitated. Sun Mingyue said faintly, "Only you, young Master Li, is indeed a little perfunctory." Li Xinghe sighed and shook his head. "Forget it. Let's just speak the truth to the saintess. We really can't find anyone in the pavilion. You also know that our stargazing pavilion doesn't have many disciples. Most of them are in seclusion and can't be disturbed. I'm the only idler." "All right then." Sun Mingyue nodded lightly. She turned her head and smiled. Senior Sister May, let's go back. Mei Chun nodded. The other 3 women remained silent. It was obvious that they had yet to recover from their defeat at Chu Li's hands. Ever since they joined the Holy Church of Light, they had always been thinking about whether they could defeat Sun Mingwei. They had never thought much of the disciples of the Holy Church of Light other than Sun Mingwei. In their eyes, Chu Li and the others were not worth mentioning and could not withstand a single blow. In the end, they were defeated by Chu Li in terms of swordsmanship. It was a huge blow to them. A full moon hung in the sky. A cool breeze blew, and the Divine Light Basilica was brightly lit. Chu Li was sitting on an armchair. Lu Chenyu and Fang Qingyang sat opposite him. Sun Mingwei, who was dressed in a snow-white gown, was sitting behind the long table. Her face was covered with a white veil, revealing only her clear eyes. Priest Zhao, you're too reckless. Lu Chenyu shook his head and sighed. Stargazing Pavilion said that they're helping us, but we can't count on them. The Royal Palace is our greatest support and our only hope. You've offended them so ruthlessly. Aren't you afraid that they'll run away in anger and watch without doing anything? Chu Li smiled and shook his head. Priest Lu, you're worrying too much. They won't do that. Lu Chenyu frowned. They're young and hot-blooded. You're being so merciless. It's very likely that they'll run away in anger. They're disciples of a major faction. They still have this bit of magnanimity, Chu Li said. You. Lu Chenyu shook his head. Sun Mingwei said, Priest Zhao, are you trying to get more powerful masters from the royal palace? Chu Li smiled and gave a fist salute. You know me best, Saint. That's too risky. Sun Mingwei gave him a sidelong glance. Fang Qingyang said, but it's so satisfying. I get angry every time I think about how they don't treat us like humans. He was also a young talent and could be said to be a genius of his generation. He had never suffered such humiliation before. Because it was an important matter, he could only hold it in for a while. He could not let it out. Chu Li had given them a hard slap in the face and felt great satisfaction. Chu Li said, I'm confident. Tell me. Sun Mingwei scoffed. If you're so angry that they run away, we might as well run for our lives. Chu Li smiled. They won't get up early if there's nothing to gain. Why did they come to help us? I don't think it's because they're close friends. They're just like Stargazing Pavilion. They don't care about us at all. They're only using us as bait. Sun Mingwei nodded. She was well aware of this. Lu Chenyu frowned and pondered. Fang Qingyang looked thoughtful as well. Chu Li smiled and shook his head. If we're not a big enough bait, we won't be able to attract more people from the Church of the Divine Blood. So, the Royal Palace and Stargazing Pavilion have joined forces? Sun Mingwei asked. Chu Li said slowly, almost. Even if they didn't join forces before, they can only do so now. Stargazing Pavilion won't allow them to sit back and reap the benefits in the end. Sun Mingwei frowned. Join forces? Chu Li said, the more people we attract, the easier it is for them to succeed. So, the Royal Palace will send more people over. How frustrating. Fang Qingyang said hatefully. Lu Chenyu shook his head and did not say anything. He looked angry as well. They acted as bait and fought with the masters of the Church of the Divine Blood. Stargazing Pavilion and the Royal Palace took a shortcut and reaped the benefits. They reaped the benefits, but did not share it with them. They even considered themselves as helpers. Sun Mingwei said lightly, the situation is beyond our control. It can't be helped. Chu Li knew that she was only calm on the surface. Deep down, she was not. He could vaguely guess that her ambition was to change the situation. Fang Qingyang said, Priest Zhao, you got hurt on purpose, didn't you? With Chu Li's cultivation level and shrewdness, he would not have been caught off guard and hit by a master of the Church of the Divine Blood. Others might not know how shrewd he was, but Fang Qingyang knew. Chu Li nodded slowly. If I take this hit, I can track him. Is this the ability of the Heavenly Heart technique? Fang Qingyang asked. Yes. Chu Li nodded. Saint, I'll go after them now. Okay, be careful. Sun Mingwei said, if you can't do it, just retreat. Don't force yourself. Chapter 32:02. Their anger surged, and they gnashed their teeth in hatred. They had never suffered such a loss before. It had always been them plotting against others, and they had never been plotted against like this. In just a short moment, the favorable situation had been destroyed. In just a flash of thought, all their hard work had gone down the drain. The two of them gritted their teeth, determined to find this guy. So they didn't move, put their palms together, and used the stargazing art to calculate. A moment later, the two of them were at a loss. Their expressions became even more unsightly. They were definitely going to suffer this loss. They actually couldn't figure out who it was. This kind of situation was very common. Otherwise, the stargazing pavilion would have been invincible in a world long ago. The other party would either be wearing some kind of precious weapon that could isolate them from prying eyes, or they would have a profound cultivation level that reached the Grandmaster's boundary, or they would be cultivating some kind of secret technique. Encountering such a situation, they could only admit that they were unlucky and could do nothing about it. The six powerhouses of the Divine Blood Church ran thousands of miles in one go and only stopped when they reached the Fu dynasty's territory. Their faces were as pale as a sheet. They found a dense forest and stopped there. They began to heal their wounds and restore their cultivation. Although the Blood God escape technique was wondrous, it came at a great price. Almost all of his blood essence had been used up, and he would need a long time to recover. He had already used the Blood God escape once before, exhausting half of his essence blood. If he used it again, he would exhaust the remaining half. He would not be able to use the Blood God escape again. If there was another ambush, he could only resign himself to death. The six of them had just closed their eyes when they suddenly opened them. Lishinga's blue robes fluttered in the wind as he stood quietly on a tree. He looked at them coldly, as though he was looking at a dead man. "It's you." The short and stout old man's face darkened. Li Xinghe shook his head and said, "As expected, you guys would come here. How did you know that we would come here?" The short and stout old man snorted coldly. "Your divine foresight? That's right. I predicted that you would appear here, so I came here to wait." Li Xinghe nodded lightly and said, "Your lifespans have come to an end. There's no need to struggle. Accept your fate. You don't have that much ability." The short and stout old man snorted. His heart kept sinking. He did not expect that he would not be able to escape from the stargazing pavilion scheme. These people from the stargazing pavilion were really hateful. He wanted to break their necks one by one. Li Xinghe said, "You can't activate the Blood God disintegration art, can you? You can try." The short and stout old man sneered. Li Xinghe shook his head and said, "Why bother? Come on, don't. Gather? Zheng humility? Throw away danger and cry for help." There was no point in delaying and delaying. They wouldn't be able to recover in a short period of time. After using the Blood God escape twice and draining all of their blood essence, they could only barely maintain their spirits. They couldn't even use 20% of their power. Li Xinghe smiled and vanished from the tree with a flash. The next moment, he appeared behind an old man and struck out with a palm strike. The old man let out a muffled pung sound as a bloody mist filled the air. He had used the Blood God disintegration technique. Li Xinghe suddenly vanished and appeared behind another elder in the next moment. Another minor heavenly star palm force was unleashed. Bang! A muffled sound rang out, and a bloody mist permeated the air again. The Blood God body disintegration technique had been unleashed again. Li Xinghe had already vanished, unable to injure him. The blood mist from before dissipated, leaving nothing behind. The person who used it had completely disappeared from the world. The other four elders turned around and left. They went in two different directions, one on the left and one on the right, and entered the depths of the forest. Sigh. Li Xinghe sighed. They were originally powerful experts, but now they couldn't retaliate against his schemes and could only resort to using the Blood God disintegration technique. No matter how powerful an expert was, they had to be wary of other schemes. Li Xinghe was no exception. He caught up to the two old men again. He suddenly sensed danger as he was about to attack and retreated abruptly. Bang, bang. The two old men executed the Blood God disintegration technique at the same time. The bloody mist surged, and he couldn't dodge in time. After the Blood God disintegration technique was executed, the four old men were all dead. Normally, The blood god disintegration technique wouldn't be affected when one's blood essence was at its peak. However, there wasn't much blood essence left. If the blood god disintegration technique was used again, the blood essence would vanish completely and the user would return to the land of the blood god in the beyond heavens. Li Xinghe turned around and continued to chase after the remaining two. In the blink of an eye, he had already caught up to them. The two old men couldn't use the blood god escape and couldn't escape his pursuit. You guys can't escape. Li Xinghe shook his head and sighed. The short and fat old man turned his head and glanced at him. He didn't say a word and continued to run for his life. The old man beside him said in a deep voice, "Senior brother, I'll cover you." The short and fat old man said angrily, "Run as far as you can. If you can't escape, then fight for your life." "It's useless." The other old man shook his head and said, "This is fate. It's not an injustice to die in the hands of the star-gazing pavilion. Senior brother, you must return." After he said that, he turned around and charged at Li Xinghe. He waved his 10 fingers, and the blood god fingers shot out like hidden weapons. Li Xinghe continuously struck out with a small heavenly palm. He shook his head as he looked at the short and fat old man who had already rushed up a mountain peak. There was no way he could escape. A soundless finger force was sandwiched in between the blood god fingers. It was as light as cotton and didn't move at all. Eventually, it landed on Li Xinghe's body. Li Xinghe immediately froze, and his movements paused. Chi. Numerous blood god fingers had already struck him. His face immediately turned red. The blood essence in his body boiled, and he lost control. Puffed. He spat out a mouthful of black blood. His internal organs were severely injured. The blood god fingers were this overbearing. It was fine when it came into contact with palm force, but once it came into contact with flesh and blood, it would be like a fish in water, erupting with a power that was several times stronger. Bang! The old man from the Divine Blood Church suddenly turned into a bloody mist. Li Xinghe desperately flashed and disappeared from where he was, but he was still stained by the bloody mist. He waved his palm like a knife, without hesitation, slicing off the flesh on the outside of his arm piece by piece. Blood was dripping, and his white bones were exposed. Li Xinghe's face looked like it was smeared with lime. He gritted his teeth and took out a porcelain bottle from his pocket. He crushed the bottle and sprinkled the powder on his arm to stop the bleeding. He then glared at the old man who had already disappeared. Li Xinghe knew that he couldn't catch up to the last old man, so he could only let him go. He had been too careless. He frowned and pondered. He thought back to the previous scene and felt that it was a little strange. Why did I suddenly freeze? Could it be that there was some other expert helping me? However, his intuition was unusually sharp, so it was impossible for him to have been plotted against. He was puzzled and felt that it might be an unknown secret skill of the Divine Blood Church. There were many secret skills in famous sects, and many of them were obscure secret skills that had never been seen before. They might not be powerful enough, but they often had unexpected effects that could catch people off guard. This was the case this time. Chu Li retreated successfully and disappeared without a trace. No one noticed his appearance. The petrifying finger was indeed unique, especially when it was used with the Heavenly Heart technique. It had fooled Li Xinghe's intuition. The Heavenly Heart technique was a good thing, and he needed to discover its mysteries on his own. This time, he had an idea and used the Heavenly Heart technique to activate the petrifying finger. Since the disciples of the Prophecy Pavilion could not divine the Heavenly Heart technique, and the Prophecy Pavilion and the Stargazing Pavilion shared the same lineage, he speculated that Li Xinghe would not be able to sense the Heavenly Heart technique. As such, it would be easier for him to plot against him, and he would not be able to divine it afterward. Chu Li nodded as he watched the short and plump old man disappear without a trace. It was truly perfect. Chapter 32:03. The sun was shining brightly. Chu Li had just returned to the small house in the spirit medicine nursery when Du Ying came over to inform him that there were more people from the Virgin Palace who wanted to spar with him. Du Ying led the way while Chu Li walked behind her. The two of them were silent and did not say a word. Chu Li coughed to break the silence. "Senior Sister Du, how many people are there?" Du Ying sighed in relief and answered, 2. Only 2. Chu Li's voice was filled with disappointment. Du Ying answered, it's Master's junior uncle to Lady May and the others. Chu Li nodded in satisfaction. Although age and martial arts were not necessarily related, in most cases, the older one's cultivation level would be higher. The previous generation of disciples from the Virgin Palace were definitely not mediocre. After that, the awkward atmosphere between the two was broken. Chu Li casually asked for some information. Is Li Xinghe around? He just arrived. He seemed to be in a hurry and didn't look too good. He wants to see you, junior brother. You want to see me? Chu Li raised his eyebrows. Li Xinghe was smart and must have suspected Chu Li. Unfortunately, Chu Li had set up a cover and purposely got injured. Both of them fluttered and arrived outside the Divine Light Basilica in the time it took to exchange a few words. Du Ying led him into the basilica. Other than Sun Mingyue, the 4 ladies, and Li Xinghe, who were sitting behind the table, there were also 2 beautiful women who sat quietly and elegantly in the armchairs. Every frown and smile of theirs exuded a charming charm. One of them had an oval face that was as delicate as snow. Her faint smile made her look gentle and amiable. The other woman had an oval face with almond-shaped eyes and peach cheeks. However, she looked indifferent and did not like to talk. Saint. Chu Li gave a fist salute. Sun Mingyue waved her hand. These 2 are Xia Rou and Xia Xiao from the Virgin Palace. Senior Xia, this is our priest, Zhao De. Chu Li gave a fist salute to the 2 beautiful women. Zhao De greets the 2 seniors. You flatter me. The 2 women glanced at him, and the gentlewoman chuckled. I heard that you defeated Mei Chun and the others. Priest Zhao? Chu Li nodded with a smile. I won by a stroke and a half. To be able to defeat Mei Chun and the others, you're indeed a priest of the Holy Church. The gentlewoman nodded. The Holy Church of Light really has many hidden talents. You flatter me, Senior Xia Rou, Sun Mingyue replied. Xia Rou said, both guardian kings are so young. This is a sign of prosperity. How can we not celebrate? Xia Rou smiled and shook her head. Xia Rou said, how about this? I'll exchange a few moves with Zhao Fuwang and experience the great light sword technique. Mei Chun shook too. Junior Xia Rou of Xia Rou. Mei Chun also shook her head. Martial uncle, let's listen to the saintess. Chun's Xia Mingyue. Xia Rou Xia she laughed. Xia Rou burst into laughter. Are you saying that I'm not his opponent? Yes. Mei Chun nodded helplessly. Xia Rou giggled like a silver bell floating in the air, pleasing to the ear and soul-stirring. Xia Xiao, who had been wearing a cold expression, shook her head and said, Little Chun, you know what you're talking about. Mei Chun sighed softly and remained silent. She knew that it was useless to say anything more. They had fought with Chu Li before and had also received pointers from the 2 masters' uncles. Hence, they knew the ins and outs of both of them. In terms of the subtlety of their swordsmanship, the 2 masters' uncles were no match for Zhao De. Even if the 2 of them fought together, they might not be able to defeat him. Xia Rou smiled tenderly and said, This time, I really want to experience it. To be able to convince little Chun so wholeheartedly, it must be a peerlessly exquisite sword art. My hands are itching, come on. Li Xinghe said, Senior Xia, please wait. He had already changed into a set of blue robes, which made him look fresh and refreshing. The wound on his left arm was hidden by the loose robes, so no one could see it. Xia Rou glared at him. Li Xinghe smiled. Based on what I know, Brother Zhao is injured. Oh, Xia Rou looked at Chu Li in surprise. She sized him up and smiled. I couldn't tell. Chu Li said, Thank you for your concern, young Master Li. I've been channeling to heal myself. I'm fully recovered now. Li Xinghe smiled. Brother Zhao, don't force yourself. It'll be disrespectful to Senior Xia if you fight with your injury. Xia Rou nodded. You don't have to. Chu Li grinned. Young Master Li, why don't you come and take a look? Sure. Li Xinghe approached him without hesitation and reached for Chu Li's wrist. Chu Li activated the divine light technique. His inner energy surged like a river as he clenched his wrist into a fist. Li Xinghe changed his fingers into a palm and activated the minor star palm energy. Bang! Their clothes fluttered as if a strong gust of wind was blowing. A domineering inner energy entered his wrist and surged into his meridians. The minor star palm energy resisted with all its might. The inner energy was endless, as if it was endless. Chuli put his fist and palm together and stood still. Only his clothes were fluttering in the wind. He had already started to compete with his inner energy. The domineering inner energy slowly pushed forward inch by inch. It was slow but determined and unstoppable. It slowly moved from his wrist to his elbow, then to his shoulder, and was about to reach his organs. Chuli suddenly loosened his fist and took a step back. He asked with a faint smile, "Young Masterly, am I injured?" Li Xinghe sighed in relief. He would have been injured if he was any slower. He smiled. "You're fully recovered. It seems like it was just a small injury." Chuli shook his head. "I'm flattered that young Master Li is so concerned about me." He looked at Xiaoro. "Senior Xia, please. Watch my sword." The long sword at Xiaoro's waist turned into a stream of light as she became one with her sword. Before the white shadow in the air disappeared, the tip of her sword had already pierced Chu Li's chest. A brilliant light rose from Chu Li's waist. It was as dazzling as a blazing sun. It was so bright that one could not open their eyes. Ding, 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 ding. The crowd heard several clear sounds before the blazing sun disappeared. Everyone was blinded for a moment. When they opened their eyes again, Chuli had already taken a step back and sheathed his long sword. Xiaoro's sword was sheathed too. What a divine light sword technique. Xiaoro stared at Chu Li and scoffed. "You held back, didn't you?" Chu Li smiled. "Senior Xia's swordsmanship is outstanding. How would I dare to hold back?" Cunning." Xiaoro rolled her eyes at him and scoffed. "A win is a win, a loss is a loss. It's true that your swordsmanship is outstanding. I can't compare." Chu Li smiled and shook his head. Xia Xiao frowned at him. "Divine light sword technique?" She looked at Sun Mingwei. "Is your divine light sword technique that powerful?" Sun Mingwei replied, "I'm not an expert in swordsmanship, but the divine light sword technique is indeed powerful. It's not inferior to the divine light fist. I've really underestimated the Holy Church of Light." Xia Xiao shook her head. Sun Mingyue said calmly, "However, the divine light sword technique is difficult to cultivate. Very few people practice it. Zhao Fuwang is a genius. Such a genius is rare. Unfortunately, we're the Virgin Palace. We don't accept male disciples. Otherwise, we'd really want to recruit Zhao Fuwang." Xiaoro smiled sweetly. "However, we can't defend against the Church of the Divine Blood's revenge. How many disciples over 100 years old do you have?" 52, Sun Mingwei replied. Chapter 3204. Sun Mingwei shook her head and said, "It's nothing compared to the White Palace. We don't have as many as you." Xiaoro shook her head and said, "It's hard to find a disciple. The requirement for talent is too high." Li Xinghe said, "More than 50 of them are enough to stop the experts of the Divine Blood Church." Sun Mingwei glanced at him and said nothing. Lu Qinyu scoffed. "Does young Masterly not know the rules? Unless it's a matter of life and death, grandmasters over 100 years old are not allowed to intervene. Isn't this a matter of life and death?" Li Xinghe smiled. Lu Qinyu said, "The disciples who are over 100 years old are only responsible for guarding the peak. They will not leave the Great Light Peak on their own accord. I don't believe that you haven't sent disciples over 100 years old." Li Xinghe shook his head and broke into laughter. "Don't lie before a true master. Young Master Li, we always abide by the rules." Sun Mingwei said faintly, "If we send out a 100-year-old elite, there will be endless trouble in the future. It's best if we don't send them out if we can." Li Xinghe smiled and said, "Saintess, you are far-sighted to be thinking about the future. In my opinion, you should first get through this hurdle before you." 100 years old was an important juncture for people in the martial arts world. Practicing beyond 100 years old required the coordination of one's state of mind. Once one's state of mind was broken, one's martial arts would not improve, but instead regress. Experts over 100 years old were the greatest strength of a sect. Once a 100-year-old expert broke their mental state, their strength would be greatly reduced, and the consequences would be unpredictable. This was also the reason why the 100-year-old experts did not get involved in the grudges of the martial arts world. Moreover, once they sent out the 100-year-old experts, the other party would inevitably move out as well. In this way, the matter would become bigger and bigger, and it would easily damage the vitality of the sect and shake the foundation of the sect. Thus, there was this unspoken rule that would not be broken unless it was absolutely necessary. Chu Li said, "This time, you must have sent out a 100-year-old master to deal with the Church of the Divine Blood?" "Of course." Li Xinghe nodded and said, "There are at least 100-year-old experts in the Divine Blood Church. We won't be able to shake them if we don't make a move. It'll be difficult to attract too many experts from the Divine Blood Church if you don't send out your 100-year-old experts. Different situations call for different actions. Let's see how many people they have," Sun Mingyue said calmly. Li Xinghe said, "Saintess, we can't let them escape like last time. Last time, we wanted to lure more experts over." Sun Mingyue said faintly, "Just don't let them escape this time." Li Xinghe smiled and turned to look at Chu Li. Chu Li blanked out expressionlessly as if he was thinking about something else. However, he knew that Li Xinghe still had some doubts. The intuition of this stargazing pavilion disciple was truly astonishing and could not be underestimated. Xiao Rou asked, "Does Priest Zhao have time?" Chu Li was stunned and looked at Xiao Rou. Xiao Rou smiled and said, "Zhao Fuwang's great light sword technique is exquisite. I would like to experience it again. We are both swordsmen. Why don't we exchange pointers and improve each other's sword techniques?" Chu Li nodded. "That would be great. I couldn't ask for more. All right, we'll stay at Xiaochunyang Peak. Come with us." Xiao Rou smiled and looked at Sun Mingyue. "Saint, can we borrow Zhao Fuwang for a while?" Sun Mingyue said, "This is a good thing. Zhao Fuwang, please accompany Senior Xia and the others on my behalf." "Understood." Chu Li gave a fist salute. Chu Li followed Xiao Rou and the other 6 women down the Great Light Peak and arrived at a nearby peak. He followed Xiao Rou and walked in front, while Xia Xiao and the 4 women walked behind them. They were all beautiful and exuded a faint fragrance. Chu Li felt that the surrounding air was fragrant and the sky was bluer. This Xiaochunyang Peak was about the same height as his Small Light Peak, but the architecture was different. The pavilions were built along the mountain and the scenery was pleasant. Since it was built halfway up the mountain, the climate was warm and comfortable. The group arrived at the courtyard of a basilica. The floor was paved with green bricks, and the entire courtyard was clean and spotless. Under the bright sunlight, the glazed tiles of the basilica shone brightly and gave off a majestic aura. Just a refined abode used to entertain guests was already so luxurious. It was enough to show the style of the Holy Church of Light as the #1 sect in the Li dynasty. Chu Li finally understood. He initially thought that giving himself a small light peak was extremely luxurious. "How old are you, Priest Zhao?" Xiao Rou unsheathed her sword, but was not in a hurry to attack. She asked with a smile. Chu Li answered, 20. 20. Xiao Rou smiled and asked, "How long have you been cultivating?" Chu Li answered, 2 years. 2 years. Xiao Rou exclaimed, "You're indeed a rare genius. The White Lotus Palace loves geniuses. Come, let's spar again." As she spoke, she gently thrust her sword forward. It was light and graceful, but it was not fast. Chu Li stared at her sword technique as if he was facing a formidable enemy. This ordinary sword contained a strong sense of threat. As the force of the sword moved forward, the force on the sword became stronger like a rolling snowball. Its speed gradually increased, and if one was not careful, one would be ambushed. Chu Li suddenly took a step forward and thrust his sword forward. The tip of his sword instantly reached Xiao Rou's chest, intending to interrupt her attack. "Good eyesight," Xiao Rou praised. The blade of her sword trembled and let out a soft buzz. Then, she flicked Chu Li's sword. Ding! The 2 swords collided with each other, and a clear sound lingered in the air. Chu Li's body floated up and his feet left the ground. He took a few steps in the air. He dispelled the force on the sword. Instead of retreating, he moved forward. As if there was a rope in front of him, he suddenly thrust his sword towards Xiao. The tip of his sword instantly reached her chest. Suddenly, a clear light appeared in front of Xiao, like a waterfall hanging in front of her. Ding, 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 ding. A series of clear sounds were like rain hitting on banana leaves. In an instant, more than 20 swords were exchanged. Mei Chun, the other 3 women, and Xia Xiao stared at the 2 of them with bright eyes. Chu Li had restrained them with just a few moves, so they felt that Chu Li's sword was extremely fast. He used speed to suppress all subtleties, forcing them to be unable to use their exquisite moves. Now that they saw Chu Li's swords, they could not help but feel a sense of admiration. Each of his swords was exquisite. They were dazzled and had goosebumps. They wanted to scream out loud. Xiao displayed an even more exquisite sword technique. Because it was a spar, Chu Li did not kill her. Instead, he countered with his exquisite sword technique, displaying the exquisite divine light sword technique to its fullest. The 2 of them were evenly matched. Xiao was even more impressed. Although she looked young, she was already in her 40s. She had been cultivating in the sect since she was young, so her foundation was extremely solid. Moreover, she was gifted in swordsmanship, which was why she had her current cultivation level. She sighed to herself. The understanding of swordsmanship required sufficient wisdom and experience. She did not expect him to have such a deep understanding of swordsmanship at such a young age. He was even 1 level deeper than her. When she sparred with him, her understanding of swordsmanship deepened, and she benefited a lot. Someone else. She suddenly floated backward and retreated from the battlefield. Her beautiful face was flushed, making her even more beautiful. She turned her head and smiled. Mei Chun, you spar with Zhao Fuang. I'm no match for him. Mei Chun smiled. That's great. Xiao smiled. Zhao Fuang sighed. I'll call you young Zhao. Go easy on her and limit it to 100 moves. How about that? All right. Chu Li smiled. Mei Chun gracefully stepped forward and fist saluted. She smiled gently. Young Master Zhao, please advise me. Please. Chu Li held his sword horizontally in front of his chest. Swoosh. Mei Chun's sword flashed. It was extremely fast. Chu Li's sword turned into a circle of light and pulled. Mei Chun's sword shifted to the side, and her body moved forward. Chu Li took the opportunity to stab at her throat. Mei Chun's slender waist twisted violently, like a python turning over. Her sword flashed in front of her and blocked Chu Li's sword. Ding! The 2 swords clashed, and a clear sound was heard. She realized that the strength of the sword was very weak. He did not use much strength, and was purely relying on exquisite swordsmanship. She pursed her cherry lips tightly, and one move after another enveloped Chu Li. Chapter 32:05. Chu Li exchanged more than 100 blows with her, and finally stopped. Mei Chun pursed her red lips and did not say a word. She seemed to be deep in thought, as if she had learned something. Mei Xia, you come. 100 blows too. Xiao smiled and said, Little Zhao, I'll have to trouble you to give them some pointers, lest they become arrogant and lose face for the Virgin Palace in the future. Chu Li smiled and nodded. He also wanted to experience the palace's swordsmanship. The Lioha swordsmanship was indeed exquisite and far superior to the swordsmanship he had learned before. It was not by luck that the palace could stand proudly as one of the 8 major sections. The swordsmanship was indeed amazing. He had learned the less ultimate sword from the ultimate temple. It was also an extremely powerful swordsmanship, but it was slightly inferior to the Lioha swordsmanship. He was different from others. Even if others could see the exquisite swordsmanship, it was useless. Without the accompanying heart technique, the power of the swordsmanship could not be unleashed. However, Chu Li could see through their channeling routes, so he could completely learn the Lioha swordsmanship and understand its wonders. Although he could not unleash it, he could integrate it into his swordsmanship. Young Zhao, we can't let you work for nothing. Xiao smiled. How about we give you 2 sets of sword manuals? Sword manuals? Chu Li was surprised. Xiao Rou smiled. Our palace has many sword manuals. You can use them to comprehend the palace's swordsmanship. They are all excellent swordsmanship. As she spoke, she took out 2 thin booklets and passed them to Chu Li. Chu Li was surprised and hesitated to reach out. Take it. Xiao Rou handed it forward and smiled. Don't think that it's a bad swordsmanship just because I have it with me. Take a look. Chu Li reached out and took it. It was still warm and gave off a faint fragrance. He looked down and flipped through one book. It was the Flaming Sun swordsmanship, and the other one was the Spirit Ape swordsmanship. Xiao Rou said, these 2 swordsmanship were passed down from ancient times. The moves are simple but powerful. Unfortunately, such swordsmanship is extremely difficult to comprehend and requires a high level of comprehension. I have studied it for 2 years, but haven't been able to comprehend much. You can give it a try. Chu Li Fist saluted and said seriously, thank you, Senior Xia. Xiao Rou pursed her lips and smiled. What are you thanking me for? We have benefited a lot from you. Chu Li nodded slowly. No matter how stupid he was, he could tell that Xiao Rou was trying to recruit him. The Virgin Palace only accepted female disciples and did not accept male disciples. Why did she want to recruit him like this? Could it be that he thinks highly of me, so he wants to cultivate a relationship so that he can help the White Lotus Palace in the future? As one of the 8 major sects, the White Moon Palace had a solid foundation and did not need the help of a martial artist from the Great Li dynasty. Then why was he so close to her? He shook his head. In the end, he still could not figure out the reason. Xiao Rou had a precious weapon that could block the prying eyes, and so could Xia Xiao. However, Mei Chun and the other 3 girls did not have any precious weapons, so they could see the mental methods of the Liuhe sword method from them. Unfortunately, they were also a little confused and did not know Xiao Rou's intentions. After that, Chu Li sparred with Mei Xia, Mei Qiu, and Mei Dong one by one. The 4 women remained calm and collected, but they were full of praise in their hearts. Their complexions became much better. Although they weren't passionate enough, they were still very gentle and talkative. Xiao Rou raised her head and looked at the sky. It was already sunset. She smiled and said, Xiao Zhao, why don't you stay here? There are many houses here. Chu Li was stunned. He quickly shook his head and smiled. Senior Xia, that's not appropriate. What's inappropriate about it? Xiao Rou chuckled. You're still guarding against the rules between men and women. Don't worry, the reputation of the White Moon Palace won't be tarnished. Or is it because you have a sweetheart and you're afraid that she'll be angry? Chu Li shook his head. That's not it. Then, do you really have a sweetheart? No, you don't have a woman. Xiao Rou smiled and shook her head. The women of the Holy Church of Light really have high standards. Chu Li smiled. I'm too ugly. It's scary. Xiao Rou giggled and shook her head. As a man, ability comes first. It doesn't matter if you're ugly or handsome. You can stay here and we'll study those 2 sword manuals. I'm sure you'll be able to understand them faster than me. Well, Chu Li hesitated. He was also very interested in those 2 sword manuals. Ancient sword techniques were indeed worth studying. It's settled then. I'll tell the saint. Xiao Rou smiled. Chu Li nodded helplessly. Young Chun, help young Zhao choose a room, Xiao Rou said. Mei Chun replied, Yes, young Master Zhao, please follow me. She was the first to walk out. Her graceful figure was light and swift, and her movements were graceful with an inexplicable rhythm. Chu Li Fist saluted and bid farewell to the ladies. He then followed Mei Chun out of the basilica and headed west. The setting sun shone on her as Mei Chun walked quietly without saying a word. Chu Li coughed softly. Thank you, Miss Mei. Mei Chun calmly said, We should be the ones thanking you. We've gained a lot this time. We now know that there's always someone better than you. They're all extremely talented, have profound cultivation levels, and have outstanding swordsmanship. However, they're still lacking in looks, so it's no wonder that they're not tempted, Xia Xiao said. Xiao Rou nodded. All right then, I won't force you. I'll bring him around the palace and see which disciple likes him. You're determined to make him the son-in-law of the White Moon Palace. Xia Xiao smiled. Xiaoro said. How can we let go of such a powerful person? A melon that's forcefully picked won't be sweet. Don't mess around, Xiaoxiao said. Xiaoro nodded. Of course, I can't possibly make a pair of enemies. However, I think there'll always be people who like young Zhao. He's not handsome, but he's very manly. Xiaoxiao said, You'll only feel it after spending some time with him. We've made the right decision this time. Our biggest gain is this young Zhao. Xiaoro exclaimed. Chapter 3206. No matter how good he is, he's still a priest from the Holy Church of Light, not a disciple of the White Lotus Palace. Don't get your hopes up. Xiaoxiao shook her head. However, his talent in swordsmanship is really amazing. He should have joined the Ultimate Temple instead of the Holy Church of Light. Sigh. It'd be great if I knew him earlier. Xiaoro looked regretful. The Holy Church of Light was the leader of the 4 major sects of the Li dynasty. As a priest, he was extremely powerful and influential. Furthermore, power was extremely attractive to a man, so it was difficult for him to leave the Holy Church of Light. How can there be such a good thing in this world? Just give up, Xiaoxiao said. Xiaoro nodded. But I've learned a lot from sparring with him. Then let's have a good sparring session and improve together, Xiaoxiao said. I think he likes swordsmanship too. For the next few days, Chu Li stayed at Xiaochunyang Peak and sparred with the ladies. He had learned the White Lotus Palace and was incorporating its subtleties into his original swordsmanship. Currently, he had integrated 10 sword techniques. Some were hard, some were soft, some were fast, some were slow, some were exquisite, some were simple, and each had its own unique power. Currently, the 10 sword techniques contained the shadows of other sword techniques. He needed to refine them until the shadows were gone, and he could create his own sect. 10 days passed in the blink of an eye. He and Xiaoro were sparring with the Spirit Ape sword technique when Du Ying appeared again and asked them to go to the Divine Light Basilica. It was already evening. The sunset illuminated the Divine Light Basilica with a red glow. Li Xinghe sat in the armchair to the right of Sun Mingyue with a solemn expression. Sun Mingyue, who was dressed in white and had a white veil covering her face, sat behind the table. Her eyes were cold, and she looked displeased. Xiaoro pursed her lips and chuckled as she entered. What's going on? Senior Xia. Sun Mingyue sat behind the table elegantly and closed fist saluted. Young Master Li, you can explain yourself. Li Xinghe closed fist saluted. Senior Xia, I've observed the sky and predicted the Church of the Divine Blood's movements. Oh? What did you predict? Xiaoro smiled. She knew how powerful the disciples of the Stargazing Pavilion were. Their greatest strength was not their martial arts, but their ability to predict the enemy's movements. They were able to predict the opponent's movements through the stars, and thus make arrangements in advance. They could wait for the fish to take the bait, or they could escape, or even hit someone when they were down. Li Xinghe said, the Divine Blood Church won't send any more masters over. They're already prepared to deal with the joint attack from the Stargazing Pavilion and the White Lotus Palace. That's inevitable. They're not blind. Xiaoxiao frowned and said coldly, how can we hide it from them? Blame me for being incompetent. Li Xinghe revealed an enraged expression and snorted. If I hadn't let that fellow escape, we wouldn't have alerted him. The Stargazing Pavilion had planned everything out. They would keep their composure and let the Church of the Divine Blood and the Holy Church of Light fight each other. The Holy Church of Light's abilities were not as weak as the Fu Dynasty's martial arts world thought. They were shockingly powerful. If they were to fight the Church of the Divine Blood, they would be able to draw away a large portion of the Church's strength. When the Church of the Divine Blood's attention was fully focused on the Holy Church of Light and sent out a large portion of their masters, the Stargazing Pavilion would seize the opportunity to raid the Church of the Divine Blood's lair. Unfortunately, it was difficult to carry out one's wishful thinking in this world. He did not expect the White Lotus Palace to intervene and help the Holy Church of Light. He also did not expect that he would fail to capture the Sixth Church of the Divine Blood's masters and leak the news. The Church of the Divine Blood had made enemies everywhere. Those who were not smart would have been eliminated a long time ago. When they saw that the stargazing pavilion and the White Lotus Palace were at the Holy Church of Light, they would immediately think of the two sects joining forces to deal with him. Compared to this, taking care of the Holy Church of Light was obviously a trivial matter. They could do it any time in the future. However, they had to guard against the two sects now, so they would not send any masters to teach the Holy Church of Light a lesson anymore. Chu Li asked, "Young Masterly, how do you know that they won't send more people over?" "I deduced it by observing the astronomical phenomena." Li Xinghe frowned. Chu Li shook his head and said, "Astronomical phenomena aren't 100% accurate, right?" "Most likely." Li Xinghe's tone was cold as he stared coldly at Chu Li. He could not tolerate people doubting the antique study of the stargazing pavilion. Chu Li's tone was filled with distrust, which made him feel disgusted. Chu Li said indifferently, "We'd rather believe it's true than not. What if they come? Wouldn't it be terrible if they're defenseless?" Li Xinghe stared at him with a sullen expression. "Even if they come, the Holy Church of Light shouldn't be powerless to fight back." He was annoyed that Chu Li's words had blocked his mouth and prevented him from saying anything else. Chu Li shook his head and said, "Young Master Li, you must be thinking of sending our masters over, right? It'd be best if they can go. The stargazing pavilion will be eternally grateful." Li Xinghe suppressed his anger and said in a deep voice. Chu Li shook his head. "We've agreed that the Holy Church will only be responsible for the Church of the Divine Blood's masters in the Li dynasty. They won't go to the Fu dynasty." The martial arts world of the Fu dynasty viewed the other countries as slaves. They could cause trouble in other countries, but the other countries could not mess around in the Fu dynasty. Once the Holy Church of Light's masters went to the Fu dynasty to participate in the battle, they would become the public enemy of the Fu dynasty's martial arts world. Li Xinghe frowned and stared at him coldly. Chu Li said, "If we go to the Fu dynasty to help you, the stargazing pavilion won't be able to protect us." Li Xinghe's expression was uncertain. Xiao Rou frowned and said, "Young Master Li, since the Church of the Divine Blood is prepared, I think we should forget about it. Let's just pretend this never happened. It's not worth fighting recklessly. Even if the two sects did not make a move, the Church of the Divine Blood would be more restrained and would not dare to provoke the Virgin Palace." Li Xinghe shook his head slowly. "Now that things have come to this, it's like an arrow knocked on a bowstring. We have no choice but to release it. If that's the case, won't we have to fight recklessly? That'll be troublesome." Xiao Rou frowned and shook her head. "It's not a good idea. The Church of the Divine Blood was powerful. If they did not disperse their forces, the Virgin Palace and the Stargazing Pavilion might not be able to break into their headquarters even if they joined forces. Even if they managed to break into their headquarters, their vitality would be greatly damaged. The other sects would definitely take advantage of the situation." Li Xinghe said, "How can we let go of such an opportunity? We've predicted that the Bishop of the Church of the Divine Blood has gone astray in his cultivation." "I see," Xiao Rou muttered. Li Xinghe said in a low voice, "Once the Bishop of the Church of the Divine Blood recovers, you'll miss a great opportunity. Is the Virgin Palace willing to let that happen?" Chu Li said, "Young Master Li, you're still thinking about attacking the Church of the Divine Blood's headquarters. Is there something you want? Is there something in the headquarters that you're looking for?" Li Xinghe shook his head. "We just want to teach the Church of the Divine Blood a lesson. They're searching for martial arts from all sects in the world. They're fearless. We should teach them a lesson." Sun Mingyue suddenly said, "How about this? Let priest Zhao go to the Fu dynasty. Young Master Li, this is the greatest sincerity we can offer." Li Xinghe looked at Chu Li. When he saw that Chu Li was about to speak, he quickly sighed and stopped him. He said helplessly, "All right then, Brother Zhao will go." "Thank you, Saint." Sun Mingyue said, "Young Master Li, you can go back first. Priest Zhao will leave in 3 days." Chapter 32:07. Once Li Xinghe left, Xiao Rou looked away and smiled. "My saint, do you really want Priest Zhao to go to the Fu dynasty?" Sun Mingyue replied, "If he doesn't go, The stargazing pavilion won't give up. All right, Xiaoro smiled. If I only send one person, no one will say anything. It's just a personal favor, and it won't involve the Holy Church of Light. However, the Fu Dynasty's martial arts world is too dangerous. Young Zhao, you must be careful. Chuli fist saluted. Yes, Xiaoro said. Young Zhao, why don't you follow us back and stay in the White Palace for a few days before going to the stargazing pavilion? The palace leader will definitely like a handsome man like you. Chuli shook his head. Thank you for your kindness, Senior Xia. I think I'll go to the stargazing pavilion directly to avoid unnecessary trouble. That's fine. Xiaoro nodded. Once this is over, you must stay in the White Palace for a few days. Yes. Chuli nodded helplessly. He could not stand Xiaoro's enthusiasm. Moreover, he was not interested after knowing what she was thinking. After all, he already had Shao Qi as his wife. He missed Shao Qi dearly as he could not return to the Ji dynasty for the past few days. However, it would be inappropriate to reject Xiaoro's repeated invitations. He could only agree and find another opportunity to reject her. Xiaoro and the others left to return to the White Palace. They believed in Li Xinghe's prediction and felt that the Church of the Divine Blood would not come again. Chuli waited until they left before he turned to look at Sun Mingwei. My saint, Sun Mingwei said, follow me. She stood up and left the table. Her white robe fluttered as she left the Divine Light Basilica and went straight to the cave, where Chuli had isolated himself. The inside of the crystal-like cave was bright and illuminated. The afterglow of the setting sun made this place magnificent and beautiful. Sun Mingwei turned around and stared at Chuli. Chuli looked at her in confusion. When his eyes met her crystal-clear eyes, he asked, What's the matter, Saint? There's a secret skill here that you're qualified to learn. She looked at Chuli thoughtfully. Chuli felt goosebumps from her gaze, as if she could see through him. Although he knew that she could not, he still felt uncomfortable as he was guilty. He smiled. What secret skill? Great void brightness technique. Sun Mingyue's voice was gentle, much slower than usual. But there's one condition. This secret art can only be passed on through enlightenment. It can't be passed on to anyone else. Chuli was stunned for a moment before he smiled. That must be a top-notch secret skill. You've seen my movement technique before. I'm using the Great Void Brightness technique. Sun Mingyue replied calmly. It's similar to the Titanium Temple's God's Limbs. It's a secret skill recorded in the Great Light Scripture, not a divine power. Chuli asked curiously, How is it different from God's limbs? God's feet uses the power of the soul, Sun Mingyue said. This technique uses inner energy. Chuli had a sudden realization. The Great Light Void technique is a void shift technique. The most important thing is to act according to your own strength. Don't forcefully shift too far. If your inner strength is insufficient, I'm afraid you'll fall into the void turbulence and your soul will be destroyed. Remember this. Sun Mingyue said. Chuli nodded. Then how do I know how far I can teleport? You could try it yourself after you've cultivated it, Sun Mingyue said. Don't be greedy. You can teleport more than once. It's better to have an idea. Chuli smiled. With this, I could go anywhere I want in this vast world. He pretended to be excited and fascinated. This technique also involves the use of a part of the power of the soul. It's extremely difficult to cultivate, but your aptitude and comprehension are extraordinary. You should be able to cultivate it. Sun Mingyue pondered. It'll be best if you can learn it within these 3 days. If not, then you're not fated to learn this secret skill. 3 days. Chuli nodded slowly. So, it's an epiphany? Yes, it's an epiphany. Sun Mingyue said. If you can't achieve an epiphany, you won't be able to cultivate it. However, the enlightenment this time is different from the previous ones. It requires the deepest level, and you need to completely let down your guard. Chuli said emotionally. Then pass it on to me. He answered without hesitation. He wanted to show his magnanimity. However, his heart trembled. He did not know if Sun Mingyue was testing him. There were 3 levels of enlightenment: knowledge, wisdom, and spirit. The deepest level that Sun Mingyue mentioned was spirit. It required the recipient to let down their guard and open their mind. The caster had to enter the recipient's mind and pour the content that he wanted to teach into the recipient's mind. Once it was imprinted in the recipient's mind, it would be as if he had already learned it. During this process, the recipient would have no secrets in front of the caster. Everything would be presented in front of the caster, and he could see whatever he wanted to see. This level not only required the caster to have a strong soul, but also required the recipient to completely trust the caster and let down their guard. Otherwise, it would not be successful. Chu felt that Sun Mingyue's motive for teaching him this technique was not simple. It was not only for his contribution, but also to find out more about him. However, if he hesitated or even rejected the enlightenment, it would mean that he had a guilty conscience. This could be considered an overt plot. Sun Mingyue said, "I'm teaching you this technique because you've contributed a lot, so you should be rewarded. Secondly, you go into the Fu dynasty, which is full of danger." The martial arts world of the Fu dynasty is not the Li dynasty. Without an escape technique, you might die at any time. Chu nodded. "Yes." Sun Mingyue said, "The battle at the stargazing pavilion is even more dangerous. Remember not to put in too much effort. Don't rush to the front and just muddle through." Chu said, "I think there must be a reason why they want to deal with the Church of the Divine Blood so badly. It shouldn't be some kind of hatred. As far as I know, the Divine Blood Church has a secret book called the Heavenly Star Jade Stamp." Sun Mingyue muttered, "I heard that it came from the realm beyond heaven. The stargazing pavilion's target might be that Heavenly Astral Jade Stamp." Chu pondered for a moment before shaking his head. Although he was well-read, he had never heard of this name. Sun Mingyue said, "Rumor has it that this secret manual is the stargazing technique passed down from the Outland. Unfortunately, the Church of the Divine Blood is unable to cultivate it. The stargazing pavilion has always wanted it, but no one can enter the Church of the Divine Blood's main altar unless they're an enlightened master." "I see." Chu nodded. Sun Mingyue said, "I'll teach you the Great Light Void technique now." "Yes," Chu replied. He sat cross-legged on the bed, closed his eyes, and began to meditate. Sun Mingyue sat opposite him on the bed. They could hear each other's breaths. She closed her eyes and began to meditate. This time, the enlightenment technique required a huge amount of soul energy. After a while, Sun Mingyue slowly opened her eyes. Her eyes were clear and calm, and her aura was ethereal like a fairy standing on the clouds. She did not have a trace of the mortal world. She raised her arm and slowly extended her index finger. Her finger was long and smooth like a jade tube, emitting a soft luster. She slowly touched the center of Chu Li's eyebrows. Boom! A loud sound rang in her ears. Then, her vision darkened, and she suddenly stood in the endless void. Her body stopped in midair. She saw a giant Buddha sitting cross-legged in the middle of the vast void. It was as majestic as a mountain, and when she looked up, she could only see an incomparably huge lotus seat. The sky was filled with tricolored lotuses. One by one, the lotuses landed on the giant Buddha's body and silently integrated into it. However, the number of lotuses in the sky did not decrease at all. It was as if there was no end to them. Chapter 3208. Sun Mingyue was surprised to see this huge, three-headed Buddha. Even though he had transformed into the Great Light Buddha and was calm, she carefully observed them. The three Buddhas closed their eyes, formed a mudra with their hands, and chanted sutras. Flowers condensed in front of their mouths and floated in the air, gradually falling into their bodies like snowflakes falling into the water. The three Buddhas all looked like Buddhas, but their expressions were different. One was calm, one was smiling, and the last one was compassionate. She could recognize them as Mahavarokana Buddha, Great Light Buddha, and Ksitigarbha Buddha, respectively. She was shocked and thought to herself, "No wonder Zhao Dai's cultivation speed is so fast. He has combined 3 scriptures to such an extent. In this way, when he cultivates, the 3 scriptures complement each other. Naturally, his cultivation speed is extremely fast, maybe even 3 times faster than ordinary people. She quickly calmed herself down and became as calm as ever. The Great Light Buddha slowly chanted and wanted to see everything that happened in Chu Li's mind. As her chanting grew louder and echoed in the void of Chu Li's mind, the void in Chu Li's mind began to change. The scenes that Chu Li had experienced earlier appeared in the void. Chu Li presented Zhao Dai's childhood experience to Sun Mingwei, then everything that happened after he entered the Holy Church of Light. Sun Mingwei saw everything clearly and finally felt relieved. She never thought that the void in the void sea could be faked. She did not know that the bright moon in the void could manipulate the scenes that appeared in the void. What Sun Mingwei saw was only the scene reflected by the omniscient mirror. The omniscient mirror was formed from Chu Li's rationality. It was extremely clear and accurate about what should and should not appear. After Sun Mingwei saw it, she closed her eyes, and the Great Light Buddha began to chant another scripture. As he chanted, a ray of light appeared behind his head. The light slowly solidified and finally turned into a bright moon. It was bright and flawless. Although it was not as big as the moon formed by the omniscient mirror, it was not inferior in terms of clarity and brightness. The Great Light Buddha continued to chant, and the light will gradually floated from the back of her head to the back of the Great Light Buddha that Chu Li had transformed into. The Great Light Buddha that Chu Li had transformed into suddenly stopped chanting the Great Light Scripture. The lotus stopped and disappeared. When it opened its mouth again, it was chanting the same scripture as Sun Mingwei. The halo at the back of his head gradually became brighter and brighter as he chanted the Great Light Buddha. Finally, it slowly merged with the head of the Great Light Buddha that Chu Li had transformed into. The Great Light Buddha's expression did not change as he continued to recite the Buddhist scripture. Sun Mingwei sat quietly in the void, observing Chu Li's transformation. After an unknown period of time, as Chu Li, who had transformed into the Great Light Buddha, chanted, rays of bright light appeared in the void. The round Buddha was shimmering and faintly discernible, like the reflection of moonlight on the rippling surface of the water. As time passed, this ball of faintly discernible brilliance gradually solidified under the blessing of the Great Light Buddha's chanting. In the end, it turned into a ball of sparkling and warm brilliance. After solidifying, it turned into a wheel of light that appeared behind the Great Light Buddha's head. Seeing this, the Great Light Buddha that Sun Mingwei had transformed into smiled and slowly dissipated into the void as if it had never been there. Sun Mingwei slowly opened her eyes and looked at Chu Li calmly. She looked haggard. She glanced at the sky outside and saw that it was already noon. It must have been a night and half a day. Normally, even if she did not eat, drink, sleep, or rest, she would still be full of energy and would not look like this. Now, however, she looked so haggard as if she had not slept for 10 days and 10 nights. Her head was heavy. This was the price of performing the enlightenment technique. She did not mind it and closed her eyes again to regulate her breath. Deep down, she sighed at Chu Li's great luck and excellent comprehension. He actually managed to comprehend the Great Light Void technique so quickly. This technique was extremely difficult to cultivate as it required a sufficient understanding of the Great Light Scripture and a strong enough soul. There were many masters in the Holy Church of Light, but apart from Master and herself, no one else had successfully cultivated this technique. Now, there was finally one more person. Once this technique was cultivated, one would have the most reliable way to protect oneself. As long as one did not court death and depleted all of one's inner energy, one would be able to escape. Once the Great Light Void technique was performed, the opponent would not be able to catch up at all. It was different from the god's limbs. Chu Li slowly opened his eyes, which were shining brightly. The entire room seemed to be filled with an invisible force, making it difficult to breathe. Sun Mingwei opened her bright eyes and met his gaze. She smiled. "How is it?" Chu Li gave a fist salute. "Thank you, Saint. It's your comprehension that's good." Sun Mingwei shook her head. Chu Li smiled. He frowned and pondered for a moment, then suddenly disappeared. He kept moving through the void to experience the wonders of the great light void technique. Using inner energy to move one's body through the void was different from the god's limbs. It was indeed somewhat strenuous and required a large amount of inner energy. The Great Light Void technique was more like an enhancement of the imminent skyline technique. It could move a long distance in an instant, but as the distance increased, the inner energy consumed would also increase. Without an extremely deep inner energy, it was impossible to activate the Great Light Void technique. The Great Light Void technique was better than the imminent skyline technique in that it could move a longer distance. If one's inner energy was deep enough, they could move 1,000 miles in an instant. To other cultivators, the most difficult thing was not the depth of their cultivation, but the use of the soul energy. This was a power that was different from inner energy. Only the soul energy could locate one's position in the void. Otherwise, once it was activated, one would be lost in the void and vanish. After experiencing this empowerment, Sun Mingyuan no longer doubted him and trusted him completely. She said, "With this technique, you'll have a solid foundation. When you arrive at the Food Dynasty, keep your eyes open and see what they're really up to." Chuli looked up at her. "Saint, what do you mean? Be prepared for danger in times of peace. You should think about how the Holy Church of Light will deal with us if we offend the martial arts world of the Food Dynasty and they seek revenge," Sun Mingyue said. Chuli nodded slowly. "Actually, I don't want to go to the Food Dynasty because it's too suffocating. The Holy Church of Light is the #1 sect, but we have to suffer their wrath. It's really detestable. With the Holy Church's strength, it should be one of the 8 major sects, right? We're still lacking a little." Sun Mingyue shook her head. "We don't have enough masters." She looked at Chu Li deeply. "But now that we have you, we have a glimmer of hope." "Me?" Chu Li shook his head and laughed. "How can I do it alone?" "We don't lack grandmasters," Sun Mingyue said, "but we lack top-notch masters. The 8 major sects of the Food Dynasty have more top-notch masters than the Holy Church of Light. Otherwise, we'd be able to fight them." Chu Li pondered. "Top-notch masters," Sun Mingyue sighed. "Such masters are hard to come by. Fortunately, we have you." Chu Li asked, "How can the Food Dynasty produce so many top-notch masters? Is it because their heart technique is more profound?" Sun Mingyue nodded slowly. "Their heart technique is indeed profound. Our divine light technique isn't bad either, right?" Chu Li asked. Sun Mingyue said, "The divine light technique is not inferior to the 8 major sects, but unfortunately, it has a high requirement for aptitude. It's hard to produce top-notch masters. Can't we find anyone with good aptitude? Normal aptitude is useless." Sun Mingyue frowned. "The Holy Church of Light has placed great importance on searching for children and young people with good aptitude. Unfortunately, they're not as talented as the Food Dynasty. There's nothing we can do about it." The Food Dynasty was located right in the center of the Food Dynasty. It was a land of outstanding people. The talents of the other 4 countries were far inferior to them. This had been the case since ancient times. Chapter 3209. Chuli nodded. It could not be helped. No matter how capable Sun Mingyue was, it was impossible for her to create something out of nothing. The quality of one's aptitude was determined by one's innate talent. Although there were rare herbs or natural oddities that could alter one's aptitude, such as the cold pond in the 100,000 Hills, it was something that could only be encountered. Furthermore, one's comprehension was more important than talent. Otherwise, one would be helpless even with the soaring grass. "I'm not worth anything. I've been left in the Church of the Divine Blood's headquarters for hundreds of years, but I've been shelved." Chu Li shook his head. "Why didn't you guys exchange with them? They're not stupid. They'd rather shelve it than give it to us. They don't want us to be like tigers that have grown wings, so they have no choice but to take it themselves." Li Xing has scoffed. Chu Li asked, "Have you guys ever thought that this might be a trap to lure you in? It's their skill to be able to lure us into a trap. We're convinced." Li Xing has said. Chu Li shook his head and smiled. "That's true. However, I'd like to give you a piece of advice. Those who are good at swimming will drown. Beware of traps. Li Xinghe nodded perfunctorily. Chu Li frowned and became more worried. Suddenly, 3 silhouettes dashed up the mountain in the heavy rain. 2 young men in blue and a young man in yellow were gliding without touching the ground. The rain slid away when it was 2 inches away from them. An invisible force shrouded the 3 of them, preventing them from being disturbed by the rain. In a short while, they were close to the mountain. The light dimmed and the cold air assaulted them. The 3 of them had entered the cave. Chu Li took 3 steps back to make way. The 2 young men in blue gave a fist salute. Senior Brother Li, this is Senior Brother Serene from the White Lotus Palace. Their blue robes were spotless and clean. They spoke calmly. You may leave. Li Xinghe nodded and gave a fist salute to the young man in yellow. Brother Su. Chu Li sized up the young man in yellow. He was tall and burly. His facial features were handsome, but a long scar from the corner of his left eye to the corner of his left lip ruined his handsomeness. Instead, he looked sinister and ruthless. It was a chilling sight. Suyin gave a fist salute. I've finally made it in time in this terrible weather. He grinned. The sinister aura was gone, and he was bright and cheerful. Chu Li felt that this was an interesting character. His cultivation was not inferior to Li Xinghe's and was only slightly inferior to himself. Come, let me introduce the 2 of you. Li Xinghe smiled. Su-yin waved his hand and said, There's no need for introductions. I've heard of Brother Zhao Day's name for the past few days. I'm Su-yin from the Royal Palace. Chu Li gave a fist salute and smiled. The Virgin Palace. Su-yin said, My wife is a disciple of the Virgin Palace. As for me, I can be considered the son-in-law of the Virgin Palace. I see. Chu Li was enlightened. Su-yin smiled and said, From what I can see, Marshal Anxia Ro holds you in high regard and can't wait to recruit you into her palace. Chu Li shook his head awkwardly. Su-yin laughed and said, I advise you to consider it carefully. It's not easy to be the son-in-law of the Virgin Palace. Chu Li shook his head. Su-yin said, Think about it. There are so many sisters-in-law who are constantly thinking of ways to deal with you. You can't afford to offend them too much. What a headache. Li Xinghe snorted. Brother Su, you're just showing off, aren't you? You're living in the land of fragrance and gentleness. Sigh. In any case, I will run away whenever I have the chance. Su-yin sighed helplessly. I can't afford to offend them, but I can't hide from them. Chu Li smiled. Is Brother Su the only one who came this time? Chapter 32:10. The 3 of them chatted in Li Xinghe's cave. They talked about the martial arts world's affairs and customs. Su-yin was extremely eloquent and experienced. His conversation was humorous and calm. Chu Li finally understood why he was able to marry a beauty from the Virgin Palace despite his disfigured appearance. He did have an admirable demeanor. Even someone like Li Xinghe was filled with admiration for Su-yin. Chu Li was also filled with admiration. Chu Li soon understood why the Virgin Palace was involved. The stargazing pavilion gave the Virgin Palace a star atlas. Not only was the star atlas useful for cultivating the heavenly heart technique, but it was also very useful for the Virgin Palace's disciples to comprehend sword techniques. It could help them break through bottlenecks. With the Star Atlas, the Virgin Palace's disciples' sword techniques would improve by leaps and bounds. The Virgin Palace's ability would improve by leaps and bounds. Due to this, the Virgin Palace would send 20 disciples to assist the stargazing pavilion in breaking into the Church of the Divine Blood's headquarters. Li Xinghe grinned. Brother Zhao, if the Holy Church of Light can help us, send 20 of them. I'll deal with the most powerful one. I'll be the vanguard. Li Xinghe grinned. Capable people do more work. Our stargazing pavilion is good at divination, but we're good at fighting. We'll need your help, Brother Zhao. I've been tricked by you, Brother Li. Chu Li shook his head. Forget it. I'll do my best since I promised. All right. Thank you, Brother Zhao. Li Xinghe fist saluted. The stargazing pavilion's divination was indeed accurate. The heavy rain stopped in the evening. The crowd departed. A total of 22 stargazing pavilion disciples were dispatched. 10 of them were old men with white eyebrows, 11 were middle-aged, and the only young man was Li Xinghe. These were most of the stargazing pavilion's elites. They did not come out in full force. They continued their journey without saying a word. They ran from night until dawn and continued their journey after eating their rations. They ran for the entire day and stopped in a dense forest on a huge mountain in the evening. There were already 2 groups of people in the forest. They sat in a circle about 20 meters apart. One group consisted of 20 disciples from the Virgin Palace. Mei Chun, the 4 ladies, Xia Rou, and Xia Qing were nowhere to be seen. There were 10 men and 10 attractive middle-aged women. Chu Li knew that these men were the Virgin Palace's son-in-law, and each of them was a powerful master. The other group consisted of experts from the Heavenly Mysteries Pavilion, led by the Heavenly Mysteries Pavilion's Pavilion Master. There was a total of 30 elites from the Heavenly Mysteries Pavilion. Chu Li's expression darkened as he looked at the Prophecy Pavilion, as if he was meeting an enemy. However, when he saw Su Yongning, the Pavilion Master of the Heavenly Mysteries Pavilion, he once again thought of the Starstone. He had never given up on the Starstone. Originally, he wanted to wait until this matter was over before slowly making plans. It was better to get his hands on it. But now he saw an opportunity. The Starstone was definitely on Su Yongning's body. If he was seriously injured, he might be able to take advantage of the situation and snatch it away. When the members of the secret pavilion saw Chu Li, they only shot him a cold glance before turning their eyes away, pretending not to see him. Chu Li knew that they were thinking the same thing. If he was seriously injured, they would definitely hit him while he was down and kill him while he was down. Su Yin went to the disciples of the Virgin Palace and said a few words to them. Then, their gazes focused on Chu Li and carefully sized him up. Chu Li sat in the distance, gave a fist salute, smiled, and nodded. Since the White Ocean Palace had shown their enthusiasm, he naturally had to return the favor. There would definitely be opportunities for cooperation in the future. Li Xinghe seemed to be extremely exhausted. He sat cross-legged to the side and adjusted his breathing. 4 elders from the stargazing pavilion slowly came before Li Xinghe. Without saying a word, they sat cross-legged according to the 4 cardinal directions and surrounded Li Xinghe. The 4 of them formed a hand seal and remained motionless. Li Xinghe opened his eyes for a moment, then closed them again and continued to adjust his breathing. The 4 elders' eyebrows were all white and their faces were solemn. After sitting down, their breathing gradually weakened. A moment later, they rose slowly and floated horizontally, their buttocks a foot off the ground. After floating in the air for 10 breaths, they formed a hand seal and remained motionless. However, their bodies began to revolve around Li Xinghe. Chapter 32:11. Li Xinghe formed a seal with both of his hands and changed his hand gestures from time to time. The starlight on his body flickered and fluctuated along with the hand gestures, sometimes bright and sometimes dim. The 4 elders had stopped and were adjusting their breaths with pale faces. Chu Li could feel a massive and majestic force descending upon Li Xinghe's body. The aura emitted from Li Xinghe's body was like a mountain, suffocating Chu Li. Chu Li could not wait to get away from Li Xinghe. The aura was vast and ancient, as if it came from ancient times or from the unreachable sky. It was unfathomable. Chu Li was secretly impressed. It seemed like Li Xinghe was a genius among geniuses. Although his cultivation level was not as high as Chu Li's, the stargazing technique was definitely one of the best in the stargazing pavilion. That was why he had participated in this operation. About 15 minutes later, the starlight on his body suddenly entered the back of his head. Li Xinghe slowly opened his eyes. His eyes were like 2 flashes of cold lightning that lit up the entire jungle. The 4 elders slowly opened their eyes. The light in Li Xinghe's eyes gradually faded and returned to normal. His eyes were clearer and clearer, as if they could see through one's heart. "Xinghe, did you find anything?" one of the elders asked. The 4 of them seemed to have aged a few years, as their voices were hoarse and dry. Li Xinghe nodded slowly. "Yes, Master Senior. Everyone, please follow me." He glanced at everyone. "Listen to my orders and don't make any noise." The others nodded. After this strange phenomenon, they understood that the commander this time was Li Xinghe, who was the youngest in the stargazing pavilion. However, in the martial arts world, it was not surprising that those who were more experienced came first. Li Xinghe drifted forward like a wisp of smoke while the others followed closely behind. Chu Li sensed a huge change in Li Xinghe's aura. It had changed from the ancient and vast aura to an unfathomable one that could not be grasped even when standing right in front of him. It was as if he was a reflection of a lake. After rushing for 4 hours, they had covered more than 1,000 miles with their light body technique and arrived in front of a lush mountain range. Through Chu Li's omniscient mirror, the mountain range was like a giant dragon entrenched between heaven and earth. The omniscient mirror could not see the end of it. Li Xinghe turned to look at the others. His eyes were as bright as lanterns under the bright moonlight. We'll enter the Church of the Divine Blood soon. Let's find an opening and try to keep our aura calm. The others nodded and became nervous. Once they entered the lair of the Church of the Divine Blood, it was the most dangerous moment for them to face death. Li Xinghe formed a seal with both hands, and a ball of blue light appeared between his fingers. He pointed forward, and the blue light spread out, turning into an indistinct light screen. It flew forward silently and disappeared into the night. Li Xinghe heaved a sigh of relief and whispered, "Follow my footprints." He glided into the valley. Under the bright moonlight, everyone followed closely behind him, following his footsteps silently. Everyone restrained their auras, not making a single sound. Li Xinghe would stop from time to time and form hand seals to produce a ball of blue light before continuing forward. Chu Li understood that he was trying to break the formation. The balls of blue light had an inconceivable and miraculous effect. They were able to soundlessly break through the formation without destroying it or alerting the others. It was similar to the Deva shedding art that he cultivated, but it was a level higher. Chu Li could feel the power of this huge formation. His heart was pounding with alarm, reminding him to leave immediately and not to enter again. Soon, they passed through a dense forest and arrived at the valley. There were many buildings in the valley. There were pavilions and pavilions built against the mountains, looking simple and unadorned. Under the bright moonlight, the scenery in the valley was pleasant. It was the complete opposite of the ferocious appearance they had imagined. They had initially thought that the headquarters of the Church of the Divine Blood would be sinister and terrifying. After all, the martial arts they cultivated were unusually sinister and violent. However, the buildings in front of them made them doubt if they had arrived at the headquarters of the Church of the Divine Blood. Some people would believe it if they said they were from the Virgin Palace. It was quiet in the valley as everyone had gone to sleep. Only dozens of lanterns were scattered around. The entire valley was like stars in the night sky, making the valley seem even darker and bigger. Nothing could hide from the observation of the omniscient mirror. He could not see the valley clearly because of the formation earlier. Now that he had bypassed the formation, his vision became clear. Chu Li's heart skipped a beat, and he whispered, "This is bad." Although his voice was soft, it was exceptionally loud when everyone was quiet. Everyone turned their attention to him. Chu Li was walking with Serene. They were in the middle of the group from the Virgin Palace. Li Xinghe stopped abruptly and turned to look. Chu Li whispered, "We've fallen into an ambush." Li Xinghe frowned and glared at him. "Don't spout nonsense." With the starlight around him, he seemed to have changed into a different person. His gaze was cold and ruthless, his voice was cold, and there was a sense of majesty in between his brows. Chu Li sighed. "They're not sleeping. They're all waiting for us. It's best that we retreat now." "Impossible," Li Xinghe said coldly. Chu Li looked at him helplessly. "It's not too late to leave now. Don't blame us for being impolite if you continue to spout nonsense." Li Xinghe scoffed and said, "Even if there's an ambush, we'll move forward bravely since we're here. There's no retreat." Serene tugged at Chu Li's sleeve and gave him a look. Chu Li nodded helplessly. He saw that the Church of the Divine Blood's masters were waiting in the buildings. They were resting on their beds to recuperate and recharge their energy. Each of them was energetic and well-prepared. There was a total of 120 Church of the Divine Blood's Masters. They were all grandmasters with profound cultivation levels, and their abilities were more powerful than his group. It was almost impossible for his group to win if they fought the Church of the Divine Blood's Masters head-on. Their best option was to turn around and escape. They might not be able to catch up to them. However, it was obvious that the Stargazing Pavilion was determined to take the heavenly Astral Jade Badge. Who knew how many people would die? He was furious and worried when he thought about this. It did not matter if the Stargazing Pavilion's masters died or the Divine Prophecy Pavilion died, but it would be a pity if the people from the White Palace died. He sighed. He could protect himself against the Church of the Divine Blood's Masters, but it was too difficult to save people. Li Xing has said, they must be prepared. This is going to be a tough battle. I've read the astrology. We'll definitely win this battle. Everyone, get ready to fight. He glared at Chu Li coldly after he finished speaking. Chu Li shook his head without saying a word. Li Xinghe continued to walk forward while the rest followed behind him. They arrived at a towering bronze tower. The bronze tower was more than 30 meters tall and had a total of 5 floors. The words Sutra Library glowed coldly under the moonlight as if they were about to break out of the plaque. Li Xinghe smiled and said, "If we attack this tower, we'll share the secret manuals we obtain." Su Yongning, the pavilion leader of the Divine Prophecy Pavilion, said, "I heard that the Church of the Divine Blood's secret manuals are abundant. Most of them are passed down from ancient times. Everyone will benefit greatly if we obtain them." A middle-aged woman from the White Palace hesitated for a moment before nodding gently. Chu Li sighed to himself. Birds die for food and men die for wealth. Who could resist the temptation of ancient secret manuals? Even he was tempted. Li Xinghe performed another hand seal and shot a blue light at the Sutra Library, silently breaking the formation. Chapter 32:12. Chu Li sensed a strange energy shrouding the copper tower. It was clearly the power of a formation. The blue light drifted forward and silently broke the formation. Li Xinghe arrived at the copper door and realized that it was locked when he was about to push it open. The huge copper lock hung in front of the door as if it was mocking him. 2 white-browed elders followed closely behind to protect him. They frowned when they saw the huge copper lock and turned to look behind them. A middle-aged woman from the royal palace waved her hand. Li Xinghe turned to look at her and nodded. The middle-aged woman followed the footsteps of the 3 of them and approached them. The long sword at her waist turned into a cold gleam and disappeared. TSS. The sword gleam sliced through the copper lock after a soft sound. The copper lock fell into 2 halves and was gently caught by a white-browed elder. There was no other sound, and the huge ravine remained silent. Everyone had to follow Li Xinghe's footsteps and thus formed a single line. Chu Li was in the middle of the line and felt that something was amiss when he saw the situation in front of him. However, he could not tell what was wrong. He secretly thought that Li Xinghe, as a genius from Stargazing Pavilion, should have a keen intuition and would notice anything amiss. However, he did not notice anything amiss. His eyes were as bright as candles and looked rather frightening under the moonlight. Li Xinghe made another hand gesture and shot a blue light at the copper door. The omniscient mirror saw that the copper door was suddenly emitting a strange layer of green light that blocked the blue light. The omniscient mirror saw that the copper door was emitting a faint, indistinct blue light. They could not see the green light on the door. Li Xinghe's expression changed slightly, and he made another hand gesture. After changing the hand gesture twice, the blue light on his hand became brighter and darker. He then threw it at the copper door. The people behind him were puzzled. The copper door had already been split open. They could have just pushed the door open. Why would they waste their energy? However, Li Xinghe's skills had convinced them. They did not say anything even though they had doubts. They merely waited quietly with their bodies tensed up in case someone rushed over. They understood that the masters from the Church of the Divine Blood must have prepared for a tough battle. However, if he could snatch the secret manual before the battle, then swagger off and escape, this trip would be worth it. Bang! There was a muffled sound, and everyone felt the ground tremble. Li Xinghe leaned backward and was supported by two elders behind him. His face turned pale. Chu Li saw that the green light on the two doors could not withstand the corrosion of the blue light. After it was dispersed by the blue light, it formed a strong rebound force. Creak! The two copper doors were slowly opened. Li Xinghe let out a long sigh and smiled. His smile suddenly froze on his face. A ghostly figure floated in front of him and struck his chest with a palm. Li Xinghe was thrown into the air as if he was hit by a galloping horse. The ghostly figure flashed and appeared in front of an old man with white eyebrows and a white beard before slapping down with another palm strike. It was so fast that the old man didn't even have a chance to react before he was sent flying along with Li Xinghe. Xian was followed by the third, the fifth, and the masters of the stargazing pavilion could not resist at all. It was only after he had sent the sixth person flying that the rest of the masters of the stargazing pavilion were able to use the small star palm. However, this little star palm was of no threat to this ghostly figure and was easily dodged. Another two experts from the stargazing pavilion were sent flying. Everyone's expression changed. How could there be such a fast person? Sword formation. The Eastern Palace disciples spread out and formed a formation. 10 men from the Eastern Palace were surrounded by the sword formation. The Eastern Palace disciples moved faster and faster until they turned into shadows that could no longer be seen. The people from the Prophecy Pavilion had their backs against each other, as if they had turned into a porcupine. For disciples of the Stargazing Pavilion flew up to catch Li Xinghe and the rest as they landed. The remaining few swarmed towards that ghostly figure like a swarm of bees. The Minor Star Palm Force formed a sea of palm force in an attempt to restrain the other party's speed. Chu Li was pulled to the center of the Eastern Palace's sword formation by Su Yin. Through the omniscient mirror, he could clearly see that the ghost-like figure was a tall and burly young man. He was handsome and elegant. His face looked as if it was carved out of white jade, and his palms were also as if they were carved out of white jade. His body movement, technique, and palm strikes were extremely fast, beyond anyone's imagination. His technique was mediocre. It was so fast that no one could react to it. No matter how exquisite the technique was, it was useless against him. Bang, 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 bang. The Minor Star Palm Force had no effect on him. In one breath, he sent 4 masters of the Stargazing Pavilion flying. He was unscrupulous and took whatever he wanted. He was truly awe-inspiring and arrogant. Li Xinghe was held in the arms of a middle-aged man. His mouth was bleeding and his face was pale. He screamed, "Priest Zhao, he's Wei Wu Wei." He felt as if his organs were being cut by knives and his blood was boiling. He was in so much pain that he wanted to commit suicide. He screamed for Chu Li to attack. Chu Li asked, "He's Wei Wu Wei. I'll leave him to you, Priest Zhao." Li Xinghe nodded and urged anxiously, "Quick, quick." Su Yin quickly pulled him. "Brother Zhao, what are you doing?" The women of the Eastern Palace turned into shadows, but the men standing in the center did not move, appearing to be at ease. Chu Li said, "I promised Brother Li that I can only attack. Don't court death." Su Yin said, "Can you handle this kind of martial art?" Chu Li shook his head. "I have to attack, even if I can't. I can't go back on my word." His cultivation level was far inferior to Wei Wu Wei's. He dared to attack because of the divine void light technique. He could openly use teleportation, which was a body technique that was superior to the imminent skyline technique. He could escape even if he could not win. Who would have thought that Wei Wu Wei would be so powerful? Su Yin shook his head. "Attacking is courting death. Your life is more important." "Priest Zhao." Li Xinghe screamed and suddenly coughed violently. Blood gushed out from the corner of his mouth again. Chu Li said, "He's coming." Su Yin quickly pulled Chu Li, but he missed. Chu Li suddenly disappeared from the spot and appeared next to Wei Wu Wei. He swung his arms, and 2 bolts of lightning were shot at Wei Wu Wei. Wei Wu Wei turned around and left without a care. He avoided the flying blades and sent another startled pavilion master flying. Chu Li snorted with a frown and shot out 2 more blades. The flying blades arrived in front of Wei Wu Wei's path. The nature restoration manifestation had seen through his body technique. There was nothing intricate about his body technique except for its speed. The corner of Wei Wuwei's mouth curled up into a smile. He didn't seem to mind at all, as he suddenly increased his speed by 2 times, sending another expert of the stargazing pavilion flying. All the masters he hit spat out blood and fell to the ground. They no longer had the strength to attack. In the blink of an eye, almost all the startled pavilion masters were sent flying. Chu Li shot out another flying blade. Wei Wuwei's smile widened again. He felt that Chu Li was ridiculous and pounced at another startled pavilion master. Moo! Chu Li suddenly spat out a word that sounded like a great bell. Wei Wuwei's figure paused. Ding! The flying blade hit Wei Wuwei's shoulder and let out a clear sound. He was wearing inner armor. Chapter 32:13. Wei Wuwei's expression changed, and his smile disappeared as he looked at Chu Li. This time, he would have been injured without the inner armor. He was proud and could not tolerate being injured by such a nobody, so he was filled with anger and murderous intent. Chu Li disappeared from his spot and avoided Wei Wuwei's attack. As soon as he appeared, Wei Wuwei was already in front of him. His palm was like a white jade, but it was so fast that it was impossible to dodge. Chu Li disappeared again and avoided it. Once Chu Li had lured Wei Wuwei away, everyone heaved a sigh of relief. Then 2 ghost-like shadows drifted out from behind the bronze door and sent 2 more stargazing pavilion masters flying. They were 2 elderly men with white beards and eyebrows. They were dressed in black, and their faces were enshrouded in a purple aura. Although they were fast, they were not as fast as Wei Wuwei. The masters from Stargazing Pavilion were not mediocre and reacted quickly. Unexpectedly, the 2 purple-faced elders in black robes did not dodge at all. Instead, they used a method of mutual destruction and forcefully took on the little star palm. Once again, 2 experts from the Stargazing Pavilion were sent flying, and all the experts from the Stargazing Pavilion were wiped out. The masters from Divine Intelligence Pavilion and the Royal Palace surrounded them and attacked. The 2 elders sneered and shouted, "Do it!" More than 20 masters floated out from behind the bronze door, and nearly 100 masters flew out from the valley. Chu Li was speechless as he dodged Wei Wuwei. The Church of the Divine Blood had so many grandmasters. It was no wonder they were so overbearing and unscrupulous. They were indeed strong. Only 10 of these masters were under 100 years old, while the rest were over 100 years old. They were probably the hidden strength of the Church of the Divine Blood. Other than Wei Wuwei and the others, the rest of the masters under 100 years old did not move. Wei Wuwei suddenly disappeared in front of Chu Li and appeared in front of Su Yongning. He hit him with his palm. Su Yongning's eyes were black and his movements were calm, as if everything was under his control. He was the #1 master from Stargazing Pavilion, and he blocked Wei Wuwei's palm. Bang! Like a thunderclap, the wind blew and sand and stones flew. Wei Wuwei's feet left deep footprints, but he did not retreat. He once again hit him with his palm. Su Yongning took a step back and saw Wei Wuwei coming again. He snorted and hit him with his palm. Bang! Another explosion sounded. A blush flashed across Wei Wuwei's white, jade-like face, but it immediately disappeared as he once again pounced forward like a ghost. Su Yongning took 2 steps back, his face flushed red, and his eyes flickered with anger. He did not expect his profound cultivation to be inferior to a junior disciple. Even though Wei Wuwei was the first person below the leader of the Divine Blood Church, he still felt very angry. This was because his ambition was to make the Heaven Mystery Pavilion one of the 8 great sects and become the 9th clan. His own martial arts should be on par with the hierarch of the Divine Blood Church, or even better. After all, he had the secret of the soaring grass. But reality was so cruel. He couldn't even defeat Wei Wuwei. Intense anger and disappointment mixed together, turning into raging flames of anger that soared into the sky. Refusing to believe in evil, he fought Wei Wuwei head-on. Pung, 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 pung. The continuous sounds of explosions rang out incessantly. Chu Li stood and watched from afar. At this moment, a master from the Church of the Divine Blood, who was over 200 years old and had purple eyebrows, pounced on him. Chu Li started to fight with him, but they were evenly matched. This purple-browed elder's cultivation level was extremely high. The Fu dynasty was indeed full of hidden talents. Chu Li sighed to himself. The two of them were in a deadlock with their fists and palms. For a moment, they were evenly matched. Although Li Xinghe was severely injured, he did not lose consciousness. He endured the pain and watched as everyone fought. However, his eyes were fixed on Wei Wuwei. When he saw Wei Wuwei and Su Yongning clashing head-on, he shouted, "Priest Xiao!" Chu Li glared at him helplessly as he fought. He scoffed and said, "Brotherly, please stop. The overall situation is more important. Hurry up and make your move." Li Xinghe shouted. Chu Li shook his head and swung his arms. The cold light had already arrived in front of Wei Wuwei. Wei Wuwei frowned and evaded, but he was forced to take a step back. Su Yongning let out a long sigh of relief. There were traces of blood at the corner of his mouth. He rushed forward and attacked Wei Wuwei with both palms. At the same time, he glanced at Chu Li. Bang! Chu Li was suddenly sent flying. While he was distracted dealing with Wei Wuwei, his original opponent suddenly expanded and performed his secret skill. He instantly turned into a ghost and struck Chu Li's chest. Chu Li spat out an arrow of blood in the air. When he landed, he hurriedly evaded the purple-browed elder's pursuit. He was chased by the purple-browed elder until he was in a sorry state and could no longer continue to attack Wei Wuwei. Purple-browed, bloody hand. Li Xinghe gritted his teeth and snorted. He recognized the identity of the elder who was chasing after Chu Li. It was the famous purple-browed bloody hand, one of the top experts of the Church of the Divine Blood. He had become famous 100 years ago and was a powerful figure who could cause fear in the martial arts world. He did not suspect that Chu Li was faking it. If it was someone else, Chu Li might have been slacking off and deliberately watched Wei Wuwei deal with Su Yongning. However, his opponent was purple-browed bloody hand. Chu Li could sense how powerful this purple-browed elder was, but he did not take it to heart. He purposely took the palm strike. No one could blame him for not helping. The rest of the people from the Prophecy Pavilion surrounded the experts of the Stargazing Pavilion lying on the ground and formed a formation. Although they were at a disadvantage, they were still able to hold on. This formation allowed everyone's power to merge as one. It was like a tortoise shell, so it was not easy to break through the defense. The women of the royal palace floated as their swords flashed like a waterfall, entangling the men in the center. The men seemed to be leisurely, but they were not. From time to time, they would stab with their swords. Their attacks were like the spitting of a venomous snake. They were abnormally tricky and shockingly powerful, so the experts of the Church of the Divine Blood did not dare to push too far. The women of the royal palace defended against the men's attacks. The two sides cooperated seamlessly and tacitly. The experts of the Church of the Divine Blood had the advantage in numbers and power, but they could not defeat the people of the Stargazing Pavilion. Chu Li and the others were barely holding on. The experts of the Stargazing Pavilion sat on the ground and adjusted their breathing, seizing the time to recover. It was clear that they would not win this battle, but they wanted to retreat in one piece. Bang, 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 bang. Su Yongning and Wei Wuwei clashed head-on. After a dozen more palm strikes, Su Yongning's face suddenly turned pale. The palm force of the blood jade palm was activated, and the blood in his body boiled. He staggered and hurriedly shot toward the people of the Prophecy Pavilion, wanting to enter the formation. However, Wei Wuwei sneered and suddenly appeared in front of Su Yongning in a flash, forcing him to fight head-on again. Bang, 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 bang. Su Yongning took a few more palm strikes and spat out a mouthful of blood. Wei Wuwei said, "The pavilion master of the Prophecy Pavilion has become a lackey of the Stargazing Pavilion. What a joke. You'll stay here today." Su Yongning suddenly dodged his palm strike. Then, a beam of light from the sky fell on his body. His body emitted a warm luster like a piece of white jade. Under the light, his entire body was devoid of smoke and fire, and his eyes were calm and emotionless. The people of the Prophecy Pavilion were anxious. The pavilion master had been forced to use his secret skill. It was not good. Let's retreat, Li Xinghe shouted. Su Yongning moved like a ghost and instantly sent Wei Wuwei flying. Wei Wuwei was in the air and received a few more palm strikes from Su Yongning. His body continued to fly and disappeared from the ravine in the blink of an eye. The people were busy fighting and retreating at the same time, maintaining the formation. Although there were many experts of the Church of the Divine Blood, they could not stop them. After a while, they arrived at the ravine's entrance and saw more than 20 experts of the Church of the Divine Blood standing there, staring at them coldly. Chapter 32:14. Kill. More than 20 masters of the Divine Blood Church shouted and rushed forward. The situation suddenly turned bad. The four elders rushed towards Chu Li first, wanting to kill him together with purple eyebrows and crimson hand. The person who was entangled by purple eyebrows and crimson hand must be a powerful figure, so they wanted to kill him first before killing the others. Chu Li shouted, "Brother Li, don't hold back anymore." He was in an extremely sorry state as he dodged everyone's attacks. Very quickly, he suffered another palm strike and spat out another mouthful of blood. It looked like he was going to be seriously injured and might even lose his life. Li Xinghe sighed helplessly. He suddenly formed a seal with both hands, and a beam of starlight shot down from the sky onto his body. Blue light flashed around his body, and his pale face quickly regained its rosy color. His eyes were like lightning. He immediately turned into a ghost and passed through the protection of the people from the pavilion of prophecy. He appeared beside Chu Li and slapped Zi Mei's bloody hand away with one palm. Then he slapped the other four elders away and said, "Use your secret skill." "Are you going to use the secret skill now?" Chu Li asked helplessly. Li Xinghe nodded expressionlessly and sent two more experts from the Divine Blood Church flying like a ghost. "All right," Chu Li sighed. Bang! His body let out a muffled sound and suddenly shrunk. It was as if he had become another person. He was thin but strong. His body seemed to be weightless as he floated in the air. He seemed to be moving slowly, but he was incredibly fast. He arrived next to the Church of the Divine Blood and sent four masters of the Church of the Divine Blood flying. This caused the people of the Church of the Divine Blood to speed up their escape. Humph used the secret technique. Purple-browed Bloody Hand shouted in the air. His voice was like a clap of thunder, shaking everyone's blood and chi. While he was in the air, he had already used a secret skill. His entire body was glowing red, and his blood essence was burning like a raging flame. He shot toward Chu Li like lightning and entangled him again. The two of them were once again locked in a stalemate. Everyone from the Church of the Divine Blood began to perform their secret skills. The nebula sword formation was about to be destroyed at any time, and the situation was getting worse. After everyone from the stargazing pavilion used their secret techniques, their strength skyrocketed. With Li Xinghe leading the way, they led the people from the pavilion of heavenly mysteries out of the valley. The people of the Virgin Palace lagged behind and were surrounded by the masters of the Divine Blood Church. It seemed that there was no hope for them to break through. Chu Li suddenly avoided the entanglement of purple eyebrows and bloody hand. He swung his arm and shot out more than 10 energy blades, sending 4 Church of the Divine Blood Masters flying. The pressure on the Virgin Palace was suddenly reduced, and the speed of its escape increased. Su Yin hurriedly shouted, "Brother Zhao, leave first. Don't worry about us." Chu Li scoffed. "You're still not going to use your secret skill at this point. The duration of our secret technique is too short. If we really can't hold on any longer, we'll use it again," Su Yin said. "It's still lacking. Leave first. Don't worry about us." Chu Li shook his head and said, "How can I leave him to die?" "Huh. We have a way to protect ourselves," Su Yin said. Chu Li dodged the entanglement of purple brows and bloody hands while swinging his hands to shoot out energy blades. Once again, 2 masters from the Church of the Divine Blood were sent flying. His chi blade became sharper and sharper, like a real blade. However, it was not enough to kill the masters of the Divine Blood Church. The masters of the Divine Blood Church all had the bloody garment divine power to protect their bodies, so their blood and chi were extremely strong. Moreover, the bloody garment divine powers upstanding chi was strange, as it could disperse internal energy. Therefore, the power of the chi blade was greatly reduced once it entered the body. As long as it did not hit a vital part, it would be difficult to kill it. Even if it was not fatal, the chi blade that entered their bodies would still severely injure them. Therefore, the Church of the Divine Blood Masters were extremely afraid of him. Purple eyebrows and bloody hands were enraged. He felt ashamed that Chu Li had injured his fellow disciples so easily. His palm force became fiercer as he activated his inner energy without caring about anything else. He swore to kill Chu Li. Seeing that Li Xinghe and the others had disappeared, Chu Li's face suddenly turned cold. He disappeared from his spot in a flash and appeared behind purple eyebrows and bloody hands. Two cold rays shot in his back and sent him flying. Then, he shot out energy blades again and again, sending several more Church of the Divine Blood Masters flying. The people of the Virgin Palace took the opportunity to speed up and escape from the ravine. At this moment, more than 10 masters from the Church of the Divine Blood pounced on Chu Li. They wanted to kill him first. Su Yin hurriedly shouted, "Brother Zhao, come in quickly." Chu Li said, "I'll leave first to lure them away. You guys leave quickly." He glided away after he finished speaking. Su Yin stomped his feet and shook his head. "This Brother Zhao," a tall young man beside him said, "this Zhao Day is really chivalrous. I'm impressed." Sigh. Su Yin shook his head. "We'll be in trouble if we encounter Wei Wu Wei. We won't be that unlucky, will we?" The tall young man laughed. "Wei Wu Wei is fighting Pavilion Master Su. I'm afraid Pavilion Master Su won't be able to escape." Su Yin shook his head. "Wei Wu Wei is really too powerful. He's much more powerful than before. It seems that his martial arts has improved again. We're really too inferior to catch up to him. It's because he's a genius among geniuses." The tall young man sighed helplessly. "Comparisons are odious. Let's just focus on cultivating our martial arts." Chu Li flashed a few times like a ghost and avoided the pursuit of the Church of the Divine Blood Masters. He then activated the Great Void Light technique and appeared in the depths of a dense forest after a few flashes. He sat on a treetop and observed the earth-shattering battle in the distance. Wei Wu Wei and Su Yongning were engaged in a fierce battle. After Su Yongning activated his secret skill, he was majestic and was suppressing Wei Wu Wei. Wei Wu Wei tenaciously clung to him, waiting for his secret skill to lose its effect before dealing with him. Their palm energies collided and a strong gust of wind blew. The leaves around them were crushed into powder and fell to the ground. Sometimes, the palm energy hit a tree and a crack sound was heard as the pine tree was broken. "Pavilion Master Su, you're going to die here today," Wei Wu Wei said in a deep voice. Su Yongning sneered and attacked with all his might. Wei Wu Wei fluttered and dodged while occasionally attacking. He shook his head and said, "I really don't understand why you insist on being a lackey for Stargazing Pavilion. They don't even see you as human beings. You're trying to sow discord." Su Yongning said coldly, "Young bishop, you better shut up." Wei Wu Wei said, "Have you never thought of joining forces with the Church of the Divine Blood?" "Impossible." Su Yongning shook his head. "Joining forces with you is no different from asking a tiger for its skin. Then you're following behind Stargazing Pavilion. Isn't that asking a tiger for its skin?" Wei Wu Wei shook his head and said, "Stargazing Pavilion doesn't take you seriously at all. They use you as thugs, but we need you as military advisors. It's clear which is more important." Su Yongning said, "We can't betray Stargazing Pavilion because your skills are restrained by Stargazing Pavilion." Wei Wu Wei said, "You don't have to worry. Leave this to us. We can lend you the Heavenly Star Jade Stamp." The Heavenly Star Jade Stamp. Su Yongning's expression changed. Wei Wu Wei said, "Pavilion Master Su, you know why Stargazing Pavilion wants to attack the Church of the Divine Blood's main altar, right?" "Hey, the Heavenly Star Jade Stamp," Su Yongning said. As the two of them spoke, their hands did not stop moving. They were still trying to kill each other and were multitasking to find each other's flaws. Su Yongning wanted Wei Wu Wei to be distracted, while Wei Wu Wei wanted to restrain Su Yongning first so that it would be easier to talk. Chapter 32:15. He concealed his breath like a piece of deadwood. He was not afraid of them noticing and had great confidence in the scripture of life and death. He listened in the dark and could not help but admire Wei Wuwei's intelligence. He saw through Su Yongning's thoughts, and every word hit the bottom of his heart. Su Yongning wanted the prophecy pavilion to enter the ranks of the 8 major sections. It would be best if they could surpass the stargazing pavilion. The prophecy pavilion had always been suppressed by the stargazing pavilion, acting as their little brother. In truth, the members of the pavilion of heavenly mysteries weren't doing this willingly. Rather, they were forced by the situation. They were all proud and arrogant people with extraordinary aptitudes. How could they accept being suppressed like this? The longer they suppressed themselves, the stronger their desire to exhale became. Once they had the chance to turn over and become the master, they would not let it go. Su Yongning could not help but feel excited. Wei Wuwei saw the change in his expression and continued. The prophecy pavilion also has the ability to pry into heaven's secrets. It is not inferior to the stargazing pavilion. Unfortunately, because your martial arts are suppressed, you can only be suppressed. As a disciple of the prophecy pavilion, it is really frustrating. Su Yongning snorted and glared at him. Wei Wuwei said, as the leader, if you can overturn the suppression of the stargazing pavilion, then you will be the greatest hero of the prophecy pavilion, comparable to the founder of the pavilion. Su Yongning frowned and did not speak. He also wanted to jump out of the fence of the stargazing pavilion. Unfortunately, the idea was good, but it was too difficult to do it. The strength of the stargazing pavilion was not known to outsiders. It could not be seen from their martial arts. Wei Wuwei said, "There's no need to rush this matter. Let's have a good fight this time. If you win, I'll immediately escape. If you lose, I'll spare your life and let you think about it carefully." As he finished speaking, he suddenly activated his secret skill. In an instant, a ray of moonlight fell on him. In Chu Li's omniscient mirror, the bright moonlight directly enveloped him and entered his body through his pores. His body was like a piece of flawless white jade, exuding a warm brilliance without a trace of blood-red light. He was well-read and knew that this was the sign of the bloody garment divine power. He could not help but secretly shake his head. As expected, Wei Wuwei was a genius, indeed better than him. It was said that the bloody garment divine technique was extremely difficult to cultivate, and it was almost impossible to cultivate it to perfection. However, Wei Wuwei made the impossible possible, which was admirable. Wei Wuwei instantly turned into a ball of shadow, like a wisp of smoke, seemingly slow yet strangely fast. Pung pung. Su Yongning failed to dodge and instantly suffered 2 palm strikes. Su Yongning spat out a mouthful of blood, and his body was sent flying. Crack, crack, crack. 3 pine trees were broken by him in a single breath, and he continued to fly for more than 20 meters before landing heavily on the ground. He immediately fainted and lay there motionless. Wei Wuwei revealed himself, shaking his head with a smile. He snorted in satisfaction. "You won't listen to me when I speak nicely. I can only give you a vicious blow. Humans are just cheap wretches." As he spoke, he strode to Su Yongning's side, bent down, and reached out to feel around. Chu Li's expression changed slightly. He knew that he might be looking for starstones as well. He could not care less about hiding himself anymore. He appeared behind him in a flash and swung his arms violently. Chi-chi. 2 cold lights suddenly shot towards Wei Wuwei's back. The flying daggers shot over without any obstruction, but it was a shadow that drilled out from behind a pine tree and fell to the ground and disappeared without a trace. Pung! Wei Wuwei suddenly appeared in front of him, and a white jade-like palm slapped towards him. Chu Li disappeared in a flash, barely dodging it, and broke out in a cold sweat. He could feel the tyrannical force of this palm, and if he took it, he would definitely be seriously injured. In a flash, he was 100 meters away. Huh! Wei Wu Wei was surprised and chased after him like a flash of light. Chu Li flashed again and was another 100 meters away. Wei Wu Wei did not believe in evil and chased after him relentlessly. In the blink of an eye, he had already chased for more than 10 miles. After Chu Li suddenly flashed, he did not appear again this time. Wei Wu Wei frowned and looked at the empty forest, faintly feeling that something was wrong. His expression suddenly changed, and he suddenly turned around, shooting in the original direction like a flash of light. In the blink of an eye, he arrived in front of Su Yongning. He did not find anything wrong, and Su Yongning's body was untouched. He reached out to touch Su Yongning's chest, trying to find the Star Stone. He had heard of the famous Star Stone, and even if he could not use it, he could use it to blackmail Su Yongning or exchange it with Su Yongning for some treasure. Unfortunately, he searched all over Su Yongning's body and could not find the Star Stone. He could not help but frown. Could it be that Su Yongning did not bring it, or was it snatched by that guy just now? While he was in a daze, Su Yongning suddenly opened his eyes wide and hit his chest with his palm. Pung! Wei Wu Wei was hit. Wei Wu Wei's face immediately turned cold, and he directly hit him with his palm. Pung! Su Yongning fainted again. Wei Wu Wei touched his chest, and fortunately he had the inner armor on, so this palm did not hurt him. He shook his head, looked at Su Yongning, and felt his pulse, and scoffed at him. With my temper, I will directly kill you with one palm. He stared at Su Yongning with hatred, and fluttered away. Chu Li used the omniscient mirror to observe from the peak of the mountain about 100 miles away, and when he saw this, he let out a long sigh of relief. He was not in a hurry to make a move, and when he saw that Wei Wu Wei was far away, he suddenly appeared next to Su Yongning, looked down at him, and shook his head. It was said that a gentleman does not take advantage of others when they are down, but it seemed that he could not be a gentleman. He thought to himself, and his palm was already pressed on Su Yongning's forehead, and with a palm energy, Su Yongning's head was instantly shattered. Even a life-saving spirit pill could not save him. The Star Stone in his chest suddenly heated up and then turned cold. Chu Li looked down at his chest in shock. It seemed that the Star Stone had become one with Su Yongning, and they could sense each other. If he did not kill Su Yongning, even if he obtained a Star Stone, Su Yongning would still be able to track him down. He could not help but secretly shiver. It seemed that treasures were not so easy to obtain. If he had not been ruthless enough to kill Su Yongning first, his life would have been lost because of this Star Stone. After Su Yongning woke up, he would definitely be able to sense the Star Stone and then use it to find him and kill him. Last time, he was almost killed by a sneak attack, and fortunately, Sun Mingwei saved his life, and this time he almost suffered the same fate. Looking at Su Yongning, who was already completely dead, Chu Li shook his head and fluttered away. This debt was put on Wei Wu Wu. As soon as he left, Wei Wu Wei suddenly appeared like a gust of wind, and looked down to see that Su Yongning had already breathed his last. Wei Wu Wu roared at the sky. He was extremely aggrieved. His martial arts was clearly superior, but he was played in circles. First, he lost the Star Stone, and then his own scheme was ruined. What was more annoying was that he still did not know who this guy was. After he roared twice, he disappeared again like a gust of wind. Chu Li hid in the distance. It seemed that this feud had been formed, and Wei Wu Wei would definitely find trouble with him. He had to cultivate harder. Wei Wu Wei's cultivation level was far higher than his. If he really came looking for him, he would have no other choice but to escape. He originally thought that only Sun Mingwei could suppress him, but now it seemed that he needed to work harder. The world was big, and there were indeed many masters. He decided to eat a few more sky-soaring pills and then cultivate the Great Light Scripture. According to Sun Mingwei, once he obtained the complete scripture, his cultivation level would skyrocket. He reached into his chest and took out the Star Stone. Chapter 32:16. This was a perfectly round blue bead the size of a thumb. Its color was muddy and gray, and if it was thrown on the ground, no one would pick it up to the extent where they wouldn't even give a glance. It was hard to believe that this was a starstone. If it were not for Chu Li's amazing intuition, he would not have treated this dull stone bead as a treasure. He would not have thought that it was the famous starstone. Moreover, this small bead was not found on Su Yongning's chest, but in one of his sleeves. It was as if he had picked it up casually and did not care about it at all. It was easy to overlook it. He pinched the starstone and narrowed his eyes. Even though he was usually calm, he couldn't help but feel excited. After spending so much effort, he finally obtained this starstone. It could make the power of his heaven-peering technique even stronger, reaching the peak level. After learning the peering skill, he realized that it was not as powerful as he imagined, but he did not lose heart. He had been waiting for this starstone. As long as he had the starstone, it would be like adding wings to a tiger, and the peering skill would be able to unleash its power. He took a deep breath and calmed himself down. He activated the heavenly heart technique and began to use the peering skill. After a while, he frowned and opened his eyes. He looked down at the starstone. After using the peering skill for a while, nothing happened. Not only did the peering skill not strengthen, it weakened. His mind was in chaos, as if the peering skill was suppressed. He could not see the fragments of fate or any images. He looked up and down at this ordinary-looking stone bead. Apart from its faint blue color, there was really no way to tell that it was a starstone. Could it be that he had made a mistake? Was this something Su Yongning used to confuse him, and the real starstone was hidden somewhere else? Unfortunately, he did not let Su Yongning wake up to prevent any more problems. If he followed his previous plan, he would first cripple Su Yongning's martial arts, then wake him up and use the omniscient mirror to see through his mind. Finally, he would find the starstone and understand its secret. This time, he did not follow that plan. He only killed Su Yongning when he was unconscious because he was worried that Su Yongning would have a trump card. It would have been fine if it were anyone else, but Su Yongning was the pavilion master of the Pavilion of Heavenly Mysteries, a man of incredible foresight. Perhaps he had already prepared a trump card beforehand. As long as he woke up, even if he had to cripple his cultivation, he would still be able to turn the tables. He couldn't be careless when dealing with this kind of guy who could see through fate. He would rather not find the starstones than wake him up. Otherwise, not only would he not be able to find the starstones, but his own life would also be in danger. After all, his cultivation was not as good as Su Yongning's. He touched the starstone for a long time, and finally nodded slowly. This was indeed a starstone. His strong intuition told him this, so there was no need to doubt it anymore. However, he did not find the specific usage of the starstone. Suddenly, a bold idea popped into his mind. He would impersonate Su Yongning and go to the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets. He immediately dispelled this thought. Impersonating an ordinary disciple was fine, but impersonating Su Yongning was hopeless. The Pavilion of Heavenly Mysteries had far too many secrets. If he were to be exposed with just a few words, he would be courting death. Perhaps the starstone needed to be refined bit by bit through the Heavenly Heart Sutra. He frowned and pondered for a while. Eventually, he gave up. It was safest to turn into Suhan first and slowly find out how to use the starstone. He let out a long sigh and placed the starstone on his chest. He pondered for a moment, and then appeared in the depths of a dense forest in a flash. The dense forest had turned into a battlefield. The people of the Virgin Palace were being besieged by more than 30 masters from the Divine Blood Church. The 10 women of the Virgin Palace were floating, and their swords were like lightning. They turned into a silver waterfall and blocked the palm strength of the masters from the Divine Blood Church. The 10 men in the circle stabbed their swords from time to time, injuring the masters from the Divine Blood Church. However, these masters from the Divine Blood Church did not seem to care after being injured. It was as if they had been bitten by mosquitoes, and they continued to attack. This was the advantage of the Bloody Garment divine power. Their bodies were full of vigor, and they could quickly stop the wounds after being injured. Their recovery ability was amazing. Moreover, their Bloody Garment divine power was a unique protective upstanding chi that could isolate the erosion of internal energy. If one's cultivation was lower than theirs, it would be useless even if they were hit by palm strength. The palm's strength would be directly dissolved by the bloody garment divine power. Although one would be injured if one was stabbed by a weapon, as long as one's cultivation level was not higher than theirs, it would only be a flesh wound. As long as one was not stabbed in the vital parts, it did not matter how many injuries one suffered, as they would recover quickly. It was the energy of the bloody garment divine power that was consumed. Chu Li's light blade was terrifying to them, and they were deeply afraid of it. This was because Chu Li's inner energy was strong, and the flying blades often hit the vital parts. Even with the protection of the bloody garment divine power, it was still life-threatening. When Suyin saw Chu Li, he hurriedly said, "Brother Zhao, why are you back?" Chu Li suddenly appeared behind the masters from the Divine Blood Church and asked, "Can you do it?" "No problem. We're just playing with them." Suyin smiled. Chu Li shook his head and laughed. "Look at the situation now. Where are the Prophecy, Pavilion, and the others? They've already escaped." Suyin said, "They run faster than us. It's time to use our secret skills, right?" Chu Li's energy blades shot out and sent 4 masters from the Divine Blood Church flying. The pressure on the people of the Virgin Palace was instantly reduced, and they hurriedly sped up. Suyin said, "Our secret skills are different from theirs. We can't use them unless it's a critical moment. Brother Zhao, you're amazing. You can escape from Wei Wuwei's pursuit." Chu Li shook his head and said, "Wei Wuwei is going after Pavilion Leader Su. He can't take care of me. Don't hold back and leave as soon as possible." "All right, we'll listen to you, Brother Zhao." Suyin smiled. As soon as he finished speaking, he let out a long roar. The long sword in his hand suddenly lit up, and his speed suddenly increased. Like a flash of lightning, he instantly leaped out of the Virgin Palace's sword formation and landed beside the masters from the Divine Blood Church. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. The sound of the sword whistled. It was invincible, and none of the masters from the Divine Blood Church could block it. Most of the masters from the Divine Blood Church had already used their secret skills, and their speed and strength had greatly increased. However, in front of his fast sword, they seemed clumsy. He stabbed them more than 10 times, and 10 masters fell. "Young Su, come back quickly," a middle-aged woman shouted. "I'm coming." Suyin responded and stabbed another master from the Divine Blood Church. Suddenly, his face turned pale, and he stopped moving. The master from the Divine Blood Church was stabbed in the chest, but his expression did not change. He glared at Suyin fiercely, and at the same time, he attacked with his blood jade palm. It was obvious that he wanted to injure both sides, but he did not expect that he would actually hit Suyin. Ding! Chu Li's flying blade hit the long sword. The flying blade contained a huge force that could not be blocked. Suyin and the master from the Divine Blood Church were sent flying at the same time, but they also avoided this palm. Suyin was limp in the air, as if his bones were pulled out. A bitter smile appeared on his pale face. Chu Li floated over and caught him. He shook his head and said, "What kind of secret skill is this? It's too overbearing. I owe you a life." Suyin shook his head and sighed. He smiled weakly. "This is my overlord sword technique. It's not bad, right? It's very powerful." Chu Li nodded. "No wonder you haven't used your secret skill." Chapter 32:17. Young Master Zhao, please send young Su in, a woman said. With Su Yin's attacks and Chu Li's light blade, there were only 10 masters left from the Church of the Divine Blood. It was difficult for them to stop the people from the Sun Palace. They were light on their feet, as if they were riding the wind at an extremely fast speed. Chu Li disappeared in a flash and appeared among them in the next moment. Suyin struggled to stand, but Chu Li activated his inner energy to perform his light body technique. He said helplessly, "I'm now a cripple. This is the price of using the secret skill. Let's not stay any longer and start using the secret skill to get rid of them quickly." "I'll do it. It's time." Another 2 people performed their secret skills at the same time. Suddenly, the sword light shone brightly and pounced on the remaining 10 masters from the Church of the Divine Blood. The masters from the Church of the Divine Blood also performed their secret skills, but their skills were not as overbearing as Su Yin's. It was either succeed or die, so the power of the secret skill was stronger. In the blink of an eye, another 6 people were stabbed. Another 2 men performed the Overlord Sword's secret skill, and the rest were stabbed. The people from the Sun Palace were not happy at all. Instead, they held up the man who was limp and weak after performing the secret skill and used their light body technique to escape. They were extremely fast and could not wait to return in the blink of an eye. Under such circumstances, if they were to be besieged again, it would be difficult to predict their fate. Chu Li followed closely behind them. Su Yin struggled to catch his breath and smiled. Fortunately, Brother Zhao came to help. Chu Li shook his head. You guys could have escaped even if I didn't come. I didn't expect your secret skill to be so powerful. Overlord Sword Technique, what a technique. If you want to learn it, we'll teach it to you. Su Yin smiled. Chu Li smiled. Forget it. I don't have the courage to use it. You'll lose your life at a critical moment. Why don't you give it a try? Su Yin asked. Its power is still amazing. It might save your life. Chu Li smiled and shook his head. He didn't want to learn the Hegemon Sword's secret technique because it was too extreme. Moreover, he had the Great Void Brightness technique and God's feet, so he could avoid any danger. If he couldn't win, he would run. Of the 36 stratagems, fleeing was the best. The difference between the Great Void Illumination technique and the God's Limbs was the Inner Force technique. Coincidentally, his inner force was endless under the support of the life and death scripture. This could be said to be the most suitable secret technique for him, and was even better than the God's Limbs. The God's feet consumed mental energy. Although his mental energy was strong, it wasn't limitless. It was easier to use the Great Void Illumination art. This is really an injustice. Su Yin shook her head and said, I originally thought that I could gain some benefits by following the Stargazing Pavilion, but I never expected that I would only suffer losses. How aggrieved. There are masters in the Church of the Divine Blood. Chu Li sighed. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to hide it from the Stargazing Pavilion. The Stargazing Pavilion has great foresight, but no matter how great their foresight is, their power will be greatly reduced once they are guarded against. Su Yin smiled bitterly. Li Xinghe's stargazing art is top-notch, but didn't he still fall to Wei Wuwei? It might have something to do with the Star Jade Stamp, Chu Li said. After he knew about the Heavenly Star Jade Stamp, he vaguely felt that it was also a treasure. Since it was so powerful, it might be able to suppress the stargazing art of the Stargazing Pavilion. When the stargazing art was deducing, it might be blocked by the Heavenly Star Jade Stamp. Otherwise, with Li Xinghe's stargazing art, he would definitely be able to predict Wei Wuwei's sneak attack. Not being able to dodge meant that Wei Wuwei's sneak attack had been concealed. It was said that the stargazing art was a level higher than the heaven-peering art. No ordinary treasure could fool it. It was very likely that it was the Heavenly Star Jade Stamp. He was getting more and more curious about the Heavenly Star Jade Stamp. Suddenly, a thought struck him. What was the relationship between the Heavenly Star Jade Stamp and the Star Stone? He vaguely felt that there must be a connection between the two. Heavenly Star Jade Stamp. Humph, the Stargazing Pavilion wants it, but it won't be that easy. Su Yin shook her head. The Divine Blood Church knows that they want it, but they would rather let it rot than give it to the Stargazing Pavilion. Actually, they can use the Heaven Star Jade Stamp to exchange for a lot of good things, said a young man beside him. Su Yin gave him a sidelong glance. Short-sighted. If the Stargazing Pavilion gets the Heaven Star Jade Stamp, they'll definitely advance by leaps and bounds. Who would do such a thing? Even if they advance by leaps and bounds, can they beat the Goddess Attraction Mountain? The young man said disapprovingly. This young man was chubby and round. He looked very festive, but he wasn't handsome at all. None of the 10 sons-in-law from the Western Palace had outstanding looks. If Su Yin had not been disfigured, he would have been the most handsome. Once the Stargazing Pavilion gets the Heavenly Star Jade Stamp, who knows how strong they'll become. They're already scary enough. Su Yin shook his head. Fortunately, they're decent and not as overbearing as the Divine Blood Church. We've gained too little this time. It'd be great if we could break into the Sutra Pavilion, the chubby young man said with a smile. You're always dreaming. Su-in said, I've never counted on it. How can the Sutra Pavilion not have any tricks up its sleeves? If it's so easy to rob, the Divine Blood Church would have been done for a long time. Moreover, it's hard to say if the leader of the Divine Blood Church has really gone mad. As soon as he said this, everyone's expression changed. If Wei Wuwei is this powerful, then how powerful would the leader of the Divine Blood Church be? The chubby young man sighed. Su-in nodded slowly with a serious expression. So you're here. Suddenly, a cold laugh was heard. Wei Wuwei appeared in the middle of the opposite path like a ghost. They were sprinting along a small path. When they saw Wei Wuwei, they stopped abruptly with a stern look on their faces. Chu Li frowned and looked at him. Wei Wuwei's cold gaze swept across everyone and landed on Chu Li. It's you, isn't it? Chu Li frowned. What do you mean? You can't hide from my instincts. You're the first and last person to dare to trick me. Wei Wuwei. Die. Wei Wuwei scoffed and appeared in front of Chu Li in a flash. Chu Li disappeared in a flash. Wei Wuwei also disappeared in a flash. When Chu Li appeared, he slapped his palm down. His palm was as white as jade, flawless and bright, attracting everyone's attention. Chu Li scoffed and swung his hands. Ding ding. Two clear sounds were heard as the two blades were slapped away by the jade palm. Chu Li frowned. He didn't expect Wei Wuwei's blood jade palm to be at such a level that it could block flying blades. He didn't show it before. He then realized that the omniscient mirror saw that Wei Wuwei's palm was wearing a thin layer of cicada's wing. There was nothing strange about it on the surface. In addition, his palm was as white as jade, so it was even harder to see the almost transparent glove. Bang! Wei Wuwei's palms collided with Chu Li's fists. Chu Li was instantly sent flying. He spat out a mouthful of blood in the air before disappearing in a flash. Wei Wuwei sneered. Still trying to run. His figure became blurry and turned into a shadow. Finally, the shadow faded into nothingness and disappeared. Brother Zhao is in big trouble. Su-in gritted his teeth and shook his head. The chubby young man sighed. I'm afraid it doesn't bode well for him. Su-in glared at him and scoffed. Haven't helped a good man. No problem. Chapter 32:18. It turned out that Li Xinghe did not intend to succeed this time, but to test the Church of the Divine Blood. Chu Li's expression did not change, but he was frowning in secret. The stargazing pavilion was really bold. The Church of the Divine Blood charged in without any fear. Could it be that they had something up their sleeves? He was more doubtful that the stargazing pavilion was not afraid that the prophecy pavilion and the White Lotus Palace would turn against each other by doing this. It would be fine if they really had a chance to obtain the secret manual, but for the sake of testing them, they sent two sects to risk their lives with them. It was no different from cheating. Were they not afraid that the two sects would secretly join forces to take care of them? Chu Li was doubtful, but did not ask further. He would naturally find out in the future. Brother Zhao, how did you escape from Wei Wuwei's pursuit? Li Xinghe was lying on the back of an old man. His face was pale and his voice was weak, but he looked at Chu Li with great interest. The people around him also looked at Chu Li curiously. They all knew how powerful Wei Wuwei was. He was like a ghost or a god that could not be defeated. This Zhao De was truly a powerful person. No wonder the stargazing pavilion wanted him to help. Chu Li shook his head. It's the light body technique taught by the saint. I was only running for my life. I was no match for Wei Wuwei at all. This person's cultivation level is truly terrifying. This is a gift from heaven. Others can't be envious. Li Xinghe said, many masters have died in his hands. You should be proud to be able to escape from him. Chu Li smiled bitterly. I almost lost my life. Brother Zhao, you don't have a short life. Don't worry. Li Xinghe smiled. You'll be very lucky. Chu Li smiled. Did you predict it, Brother Zhao? Of course. Li Xinghe nodded with certainty. Brother Zhao, you have a great destiny. You're extremely noble and have a boundless future. Chu Li laughed. My future is boundless. I don't even know what treasures are in the stargazing pavilion. Sun Mingyuan muttered. Everything in the stargazing pavilion is good. Just pick one that you like. It won't be too bad. Chu Li nodded. Sun Mingwei said, go. You can rest there for a while. The star atlas is endless. You could be thick-skinned and look at it for a few days. They'll surely agree on account of your hard work. Chu Li Fist saluted and suddenly disappeared. He left the Great Light Peak with the Void Light technique. Li Xinghe had mostly recovered after one night. His complexion was rosy again. He arrived at the cave. Chu Li was in early morning and brought him to another cave. This is the treasure cave. Li Xinghe pointed at the short cave in front of him and said with a smile, the wondrous items that we've picked up are stored in there. They're all valuable items. Some might look like ordinary stones, but they're actually wondrous stones. It'll all depend on your eyesight and luck if you haven't been recognized by anyone. Chu Li nodded. Li Xinghe extended his hand and slapped the mossy wall beside the cave a few times. Then, with a muffled boom, the stone door opened. Li Xinghe took the lead and entered the cave, followed by Chu Li. There were many luminous pearls embedded in the cave, illuminating it with a bright and gentle light. After walking more than 10 steps, shelves began to be placed on both sides of the passage. There were shelves on both sides of the passage, each with oddly shaped items. There were stones, tree branches, weapons, and remnants of scrolls. However, the words on the scrolls were strange and did not look like modern writing. Chu Li continued to walk deeper. The shelves on both sides of the passage were connected to each other. There were fruit pits, rings, daggers, short swords, long swords, armor, and even some strange weapons. There were even pots of flowers and plants. He walked as he looked around. By the time he reached the end of the passage, he was already more than 200 meters away. 200 meters meant that the wooden shelves spanned more than 400 meters. There were all kinds of items, and they were all-inclusive. Chu Li could not take his eyes off them, let alone pick a good one. When Li Xinghe saw Chu Li's expression, a proud look appeared on his face. Brother Zhao, although the items here are oddly shaped, they're all good items. Otherwise, we wouldn't have kept them here. Chu Li nodded. In my opinion, Brother Zhao, you can just pick any one of them. Li Xinghe smiled. It'll be enough for you to smile until you wake up at home. Chu Li shook his head and started walking again. Finally, he stopped on a charcoal-like withered tree branch and frowned thoughtfully. Why, Brother Zhao, you're interested in this piece of wood? Li Xinghe smiled. But this piece of wood does have some history. Chu Li pretended to listen attentively. Chapter 32:19. I picked this piece of wood up myself. Li Xinghe pointed at the withered wood and shook his head with a sigh. Don't be fooled by its ordinary appearance. It's an item that survived the lightning strike. Chu Li reached out and picked it up to examine it carefully. It was like a piece of charcoal. It was really inconspicuous. Li Xinghe said, back when I reached the 10th level of the star-gazing art, heavenly lightning descended and struck the towering tree beside me. The tree was reduced to ashes, and only this piece of wood was left. Chu Li raised his eyebrows. Lightning from the sky? Li Xinghe nodded slowly and said, yes, the star-gazing art is a technique to peer into the heavens. It's fear by the heavens, so it naturally sent down lightning as a warning. Chu Li smiled. Where's the heavenly heart technique? Yes. Li Xinghe nodded. I know that the Holy Church of Light has obtained the heavenly heart technique. Yes. Chu Li said, I've also cultivated it, but I don't think there's anything special about it. That's because your cultivation level isn't high enough. Li Xinghe shook his head and said, the heavenly heart art also requires talent. Without sufficient talent, it's useless even if you cultivate it your entire life. You won't be able to break through to the 9th level. Chu Li asked, if that's the case, will there be divine thunder when I master the 9th level? Yes. Li Xinghe grinned. Scary, right? That will depend on your ability. If you can calculate the location of the lightning, you will naturally be able to avoid it. If you can't, then you won't be able to withstand the might of the heavens. Chu Li nodded slowly and asked, is there no other way to avoid this sky thunder? No. Li Xinghe said, the mysteries of the heavens are hard to conceal and there's nowhere to hide. One can only rely on one's own ability. This piece of wood contains pure heavenly thunder energy, which is very useful for comprehending the might of the heavens. Chu Li thought about it for a while before he shook his head and left. Li Xinghe said in disappointment, "This is good stuff." Chu Li strolled away and stopped in front of a broken string of prayer beads. There were only 6 Buddhist prayer beads left on the string. They were dusty and looked as if they were strung together by stones that were randomly picked up from the ground. The string of beads had been worn down to the point that there was only a thin thread left, and it looked like it could break at any time. Seeing this, no one dared to touch the string of beads. Otherwise, the string would be broken. "This also has its origins," Li Xinghe said. Chu Li turned to look at him and smiled. "Don't tell me this is a Buddhist bead from an eminent monk." "That's not necessarily the case," Li Xinghe said. "I picked it up at the foot of a mountain when I passed by during one of my travels. However, you know that there are no monks in the Fu dynasty. This thing must have been around for many years. No matter what, it's an antique." Chu Li smiled and nodded. Ever since the spirit beasts entered Shirwan Hills, the Fu dynasty had banished the Buddhist sects and banished them to the Li dynasty, the Ji dynasty, and the other 4 countries. The Buddhist sects no longer appeared in the central Fu dynasty, so there should be no more Buddhist prayer beads. This Buddhist prayer bead was at least 1,000 years old. Being able to preserve it until now, it was indeed an antique. Chu Li shook his head. "So what if it's an antique? It has no spiritual energy at all. It's just an ordinary stone." "That might not be the case." Li Xinghe shook his head and said, "I wouldn't have picked it up if it were that simple. After such a long period of time, even the toughest stone would have decayed. Yet this thing is perfectly intact." Chu Li said, "It could also be left behind by a monk who snuck into the Fu dynasty." "Brotherly, do you also think that these prayer beads are mysterious?" "This." Li Xinghe hesitated. Chu Li shook his head and said, "It looks quite interesting. Let's take this." "Do you really want this?" Li Xinghe looked at him doubtfully and then at the broken prayer beads. He smiled and said, "If you're not sure, you can change to another one. I can't let you come here for nothing. There's still a treasure sword and a secret manual over there. Although they're incomplete, they're still very powerful." Chu Li smiled. "I don't lack treasure swords or secret manuals. I'll try my luck and see what kind of treasure this is. It might really be an antique from 1,000 years ago. Besides, the Buddhist sects also talk about karma. It's fate that we met here today. Since Brother Zhao has made up your mind, I won't try to persuade you anymore," Li Xinghe said with a smile. Chu Li reached out and gently picked up the prayer beads. He did not feel anything strange when he touched them. They were just like ordinary stones. There was a reason why he picked up the prayer beads. Under the omniscient mirror, the string of prayer beads was like a cloud of mist. He could not see through it no matter how hard he tried. Furthermore, he had a flash of inspiration. He vaguely felt that this string of prayer beads was very important to him, which was why he picked it up. "I think it's a star stone," Chu Li said. Li Xinghe was startled. He could not help but laugh. "A star stone," Chu Li said. "This string of prayer beads gives me a feeling of vastness. It should be a star stone." He, Li Xinghe chuckled and shook his head. "Brother Zhao, this is definitely not a star stone. That might not be the case." Chu Li shook his head. "The star stone is a legendary item. No one has seen it before. I've seen a star stone before." Li Xinghe said, "It doesn't look like this. It said that the star stone can strengthen the power of the stargazing technique and heavenly heart technique. Is that true?" Chu Li asked. "Indeed," Li Xinghe said, "with the star stone, one's understanding of heaven and earth will deepen. It'll be easier to activate the heaven-peering skill and stargazing technique. Unfortunately, I've never seen it." Chu Li shook his head and sighed. Li Xinghe smiled. "It seems like there's only one star stone in this world. It's in Pavilion Master Su's possession. Outsiders won't be able to see it." Chu Li said, "Oh right, have you found Pavilion Master Su?" "No." Li Xinghe sighed and shook his head. "The odds are against him. I never thought that Pavilion Master Su would die in the hands of the Church of the Divine Blood. It's truly a sin. I don't know how to face the prophecy pavilion." Chu Li said, "Pavilion Master Su's cultivation level is profound. How could he have lost his life?" Li Xinghe frowned and sighed. I didn't calculate this back then. It's truly a mistake. Wei Wuwei's life is connected to the Outland. It's beyond the detection of the stargazing technique. Therefore, Pavilion Master Su must have been killed by Wei Wuwei. Wei Wuwei. Chu Li sighed. It's hard to say if Pavilion Master Su could have won if he attacked. However, he could have escaped, right? I'm afraid I was too careless. Li Xinghe shook his head. It's useless to talk about this. Pavilion Master Su has passed away, and the Prophecy Pavilion has suffered a heavy blow. Sigh. He shook his head and sighed. However, Chu Li knew that he was putting on an act. He did not feel guilty at all. Instead, he might have done it on purpose. The rise of the Prophecy Pavilion had threatened the position of the Stargazing Pavilion. Therefore, the attack on the Church of the Divine Blood this time required the Prophecy Pavilion to send out so many masters. Su Yongning had even personally participated. Logically speaking, Su Yongning would not have come personally. I'm afraid that Starstone has been taken by Wei Wuwei. Chu Li lamented. What a pity. Li Xinghe sneered. It's useless even if he goes. Chu Li said, Wei Wuwei might have cultivated the Heavenly Heart technique or the Stargazing technique. Perhaps the Starstone can help his cultivation. The Starstone can help his cultivation? Li Xinghe laughed and shook his head. Perhaps everyone thinks that the Starstone can help the cultivation of the Heavenly Heart technique and the Stargazing technique. Chu Li nodded. Of course. Otherwise, how could it be considered a treasure? Chapter 32:20. Chu Li looked at him in shock. Li Xinghe grinned. You didn't expect this, did you? The world is full of strange things, and those treasures are often beyond the imagination of ordinary people. The Starstone is one of the strangest of them all. If it wasn't our stargazing pavilion, even if someone obtained the Starstone, it would be useless. Chu Li smiled. Could it be that the Starstone belongs to the stargazing pavilion? Li Xinghe shook his head and said, Our stargazing pavilion has a secret tome that records the Starstone. It's a pity that our stargazing pavilion disciples weren't so lucky. They couldn't find the Starstone after much effort, and it ended up in the hands of a divination pavilion disciple. Truly, Chu Li said, this is also the wonder of fate. Not bad, Li Xinghe said. It is precisely because of the stellar stone that the pavilion of divination managed to gain a firm foothold and gradually straighten its back to its current strength. Is the Starstone really that magical? Chu Li laughed. It can help the Prophecy Pavilion gain a foothold? The Starstone suppresses the cultivation of the Heavenly Heart art. Li Xinghe let out a sigh and said, but it can activate the power of the Heaven-Peering art. As long as the Heaven-Peering art is executed with the Starstone in hand, it will rise to a whole new level. Its power is not inferior to our star-gazing art. How miraculous! If he's really that powerful, how could Pavilion Master Su die? Chu Li shook his head and smiled. It can't seek good fortune and avoid calamity. It's better to give up on a treasure that you can't even protect yourself. It's not considered a true treasure, but an inauspicious item instead. Brother Zhao, you're right, Li Xinghe said, but it's truly a pity that the stellar stone will disappear from now on. Chu Li was stunned. Li Xinghe said, the stellar stone requires sufficient nourishment. Without the nourishment of the Heavenly Heart art, it's just a stone. It's useless for Wei Wuwei to obtain it, but it's impossible for him to return it to anyone. He can only put it on the shelf and remain silent. As time passes, it will eventually be forgotten by people and worn away in the passage of time. What a pity. Chu Li shook his head and said, however, Wei Wuwei won't use it to exchange unless he can snatch it. Unfortunately, it won't be easy to snatch something from Wei Wuwei. That's right, it wasn't easy. Li Xinghe sighed and revealed a solemn expression. He was well aware of how powerful Wei Wuwei was. Not only did he have extraordinary martial arts, but his actions were also unpredictable, making it difficult for others to grasp his path and guard against him. He was most afraid of Wei Wuwei and had always wanted to get rid of him. Chu Li said, Is there no way to cure Wei Wuwei? No one can restrain the martial arts of the Divine Blood Church. The power of the Bloody Garment Divine art is astonishing. Li Xinghe replied, "It's an independent entity. The only thing it can restrain is the sound assassination art. The Jade Truth Temple is proficient in the sound assassination art, but they rarely leave the mountain." Chu Li frowned. The Church of the Divine Blood is so overbearing, but they didn't take the initiative to deal with the Jade Truth Temple. They can't afford to offend the Jade Truth Temple. Li Xinghe shook his head and said, "Moreover, the Church of the Divine Blood and the Jade Truth Temple have a deep relationship. There are very few conflicts between them." "If that's the case," Chu Li said, "then no one can defeat the Church of the Divine Blood. Immortal Attraction Mountain is fine." Li Xinghe smiled. Immortal Attraction Mountain is unique and unrivaled. It's not difficult for them to deal with the Church of the Divine Blood, but they won't do anything. The masters of Immortal Attraction Mountain can't be bothered with the disturbances of the mortal world. Immortal Attraction Mountain. Chu Li sighed. "I heard that the dragon taming technique is extremely powerful. It's the world's #1 mystical technique." "Of course, the dragon taming technique is powerful." Li Xinghe nodded. "Unfortunately, there are very few people who can cultivate the dragon taming technique." "What qualities do I need to cultivate the dragon taming technique?" Chu Li asked. "Does the stargazing pavilion have the dragon taming technique?" Li Xinghe smiled. "Could it be that Brother Zhao wants to cultivate the dragon taming technique?" "Of course." Chu Li nodded. "How can I not be curious about such a mystical technique? Wouldn't I have lived in vain if I didn't cultivate it? Looks like you're a martial arts fanatic, Brother Zhao." Li Xinghe smiled. "However, the cultivation of the dragon taming technique requires not only a strong body, but also a strong enough soul energy. If you want to cultivate the dragon taming technique, you'll have to cultivate the stargazing technique to have a glimmer of hope." "What about the heavenly heart technique?" Chu Li asked. "At the very least, it has to be perfect." Li Xinghe said, "This is only a sliver of a chance. As for whether or not one can cultivate the art of dragon control, it will depend on other aptitudes. In short, there are very few disciples on the Immortal Attraction Mountain. It's not without reason that only one appears in 100 years." Chu Li nodded slowly and played with a string of prayer beads. He shook his head and said, "The dragon taming technique, what a pity. I see that Brother Zhao is a genius. You might be able to cultivate the art of dragon control. Unfortunately, the art of dragon control is a secret of Goddess Attraction Mountain." Li Xinghe smiled and said, "If you really don't want to give up, cultivate the heavenly heart art to perfection. Then go to Immortal Attraction Mountain. There might be a chance to cultivate the dragon control art there." The heavenly heart technique has been perfected. Chu Li could not help but laugh. "Since it's done, I'll take my leave first, Brother Li." "Brother Zhao, don't worry." Li Xinghe quickly waved his hand and walked out. As he walked, he said, "If we attack the Divine Blood Church again, I hope Brother Zhao will continue to help us." Chu Li frowned. "Again? Now that I've investigated the situation, I'll be more confident next time." Li Xinghe said, "The Church of the Divine Blood has been plundering secret manuals for various sects recently. There must be many mystical arts and antique studies in the Sutra Library. If we barge in," Chu Li waved his hand and said, "Forget it. I want to cultivate the dragon control art. It's fine if I don't learn other mystical arts and antique studies." "Brother Zhao, you have high standards." Li Xinghe smiled. "However, from what I know, the Church of the Divine Blood's Sutra Library still has many ancient antique studies. Unfortunately, there are very few of them because of the high aptitude requirement." Chu Li frowned and thought about it. Then he shook his head and said, "Although antique studies are good, I don't have the heart to learn them." Li Xinghe sighed to himself. This guy was not going to act until he saw the hair. He pointed around and smiled. "Then I can pick 2 more treasures. What do you think?" Chu Li raised his eyebrows and finally smiled. "If you really want to fight, you can let me know in advance. We'll see if I come or not." "That'll be great." Li Xinghe nodded. Although he was not satisfied, at least he did not directly reject it. That was enough to show his interest. As long as he was a little more provocative, he would definitely be able to get Li Xinghe's help. Chu Li sat cross-legged in the thatched cottage at Small Light Peak. The strong wind howled outside like swinging knives, but but the narrow thatched cottage was as warm as spring. He held the star stone in his hand and closed his eyes to activate the heavenly heart technique. He had been using the heavenly heart technique to nourish the star stone for the past few days. He wanted to experience the star stone's profoundness. Unfortunately, the star stone looked like an ordinary stone no matter how he looked at it. He kept suspecting that he had taken the wrong stone and that he had been tricked by Su Yongning. It was very likely that Su Yongning had taken an ordinary stone with him. The real star stone was not with him and was hidden somewhere else. If that was the case, the star stone would be a lost item and no one would be able to obtain it. However, since things had come to this, he could only persevere. He was confident in his intuition, so he had been activating the heavenly heart technique and using the inner energy of the technique to nourish this extremely ordinary stone. In the blink of an eye, 7 days had passed. Since morning, he had a strong intuition that the stone seemed to have undergone some changes. It seemed like it had been changed by the heavenly heart technique. Although there were no changes on the outside, there was a complete change on the inside. Unfortunately, the omniscient mirror could not see through the changes on the inside. Chapter 32:21. He felt that there would be a fundamental change in another 2 to 3 days. By then, the nurturing process would be complete and the star stone would truly be of use to him. He was inexplicably excited when he thought of this and wished that time would pass quickly. While nurturing the star stone and activating the heavenly heart technique, the great light scripture recited by the Buddha of great light in the void of his mind had transformed into the complete great light scripture. Although he did not cultivate the great light technique, his cultivation level was soaring. In just a short 7 days, he felt that his cultivation level had increased by a level. The next time he met Wei Wu Wei, he would not be in such a difficult situation even if he could not defeat him. Unfortunately, he was still inferior to Sun Mingwei. He did not know how much of a difference there was. Every time he improved his martial arts, he would feel inferior to Sun Mingwei, as if he could never surpass her. This kind of feeling could easily make one despair, but it also ignited Chu Li's fighting spirit. He wanted nothing more than to cultivate diligently all day long so that he could catch up to Sun Mingwei, even if half of her cultivation level was inherited. Just as he was in a good mood, he suddenly heard footsteps outside. Even in the howling wind, the footsteps could be heard clearly. It was deliberately made for him to hear. "Come in." He raised his voice and saw Du Ying, who was dressed in a green robe, standing tall and slender outside. Du Ying gently pushed the door open, bringing in fresh air and a faint fragrance. She walked to the bed and looked at Chu Li quietly. Chu Li opened his eyes and sighed helplessly. "Senior sister, did something big happen?" He was so close to successfully nurturing it, but he had to deal with other matters. If not for his own ambition, he would have run back to Gale Branch to cultivate in isolation and ignore the Holy Church of Light. Du Ying smiled apologetically. "Sorry to disturb you, junior brother. The saint wants to see you." Chu Li nodded. "Did something big happen again?" "Yes, the falling Autumn City branch was destroyed overnight. Nobody was spared." Du Ying frowned. Her bright eyes flashed with anger, and she sighed softly. "The saint is very angry. She'll probably send you over to take a look." Chu Li frowned. Falling Autumn City. The Qiu dynasty and the Li dynasty had stopped fighting. Both sides felt that they could not win the war, and neither did they have the confidence to win. As such, they reluctantly agreed to a truce. However, the atmosphere in Falling Autumn City, which was located at the southwestern end of the Li dynasty and the Qiu dynasty, was still tense. There were 2 reasons for setting up a branch in Falling Autumn City. Firstly, it was to facilitate the transmission of information. Secondly, it was to guard Falling Autumn City. The war between armies had stopped, but the war between martial artists would never stop. Not only did Falling Autumn City set up a branch there, but the other 3 major sects also set up branches. All of them had elites stationed in Falling Autumn City to assist the imperial court in defending Falling Autumn City. How about the other 3 sects? Chu Li got up from the bed and kept the star stone in his sleeve. He frowned as he walked out of the room. Don't tell me he's safe and sound. Junior brother is right. The other 3 sects didn't suffer any losses, and only our branch was destroyed. Therefore, this matter is extremely suspicious. Dewing followed him out. The 2 of them quickly entered the howling astral winds and floated down the mountain. Their voices were clearly transmitted into each other's ears. Have Priest Liu and Priest Fong arrived? Chuli asked as he walked. Dewing shook her head. The 2 Guardian Kings had matters to attend to outside, so they couldn't make it back. Chuli asked, My saint suspects that the other 3 sects did this. My saint can't say for sure. She didn't make conclusion either. Dewing followed behind him. She was light and graceful like a spirit swallow gliding across the sky. She was graceful and captivating. It could be the other 3 sects or the Chiu dynasty. I'm afraid you'll have to investigate it yourself, Junior brother. Do I have to do this myself? Isn't an altar leader enough? Chuli shook his head. An altar leader's position was extremely high. Although a priest's position was higher, he was more detached. Usually, an altar leader would only be dispatched if an altar leader failed. It seems like altar leader sure has investigated, but he couldn't find any clues, Dewing said. So, Chuli smiled. He knew what Dewing was trying to say. He scoffed and said, Do you think an altar leader can challenge a priest? Altar leader Sure's martial arts is also extremely high, Dewing said. Moreover, he's also old, so it's inevitable that he'll take advantage of his seniority. Junior brother, don't offend him. It's very annoying when he plays tricks on you. You won't be able to get anything on him, and it'll delay the important matters. Chuli nodded. Yes, I'll try my best. Dewing looked at him helplessly. She knew that her words were useless. The divine light, basilica, shone brightly in the early morning. Sun Mingyue sat quietly behind a long table, flipping through a dossier. She was dressed in snow white, and her face was covered with a white veil, revealing only her bright eyes. An imposing middle-aged man stood at the bottom of the stairs. His eyes were bright, and his aura was like a lion's as he sized up Chuli, who had just entered the basilica. Chuli fist saluted. Saint, I'm sorry to disturb your isolated cultivation. Sun Mingyue put down the dossier and said, This is Shi Zong's ancient history altar leader. The falling Autumn City branch is under his jurisdiction. Chuli fist saluted. Altar leader Shi Zonggu fist saluted and said, Priest Zhao is indeed young and promising. Chuli did not comment. He looked at Sun Mingyue and asked, Saint, what's the urgent matter? He would not say that Du Ying had already informed him. Sun Mingyue nodded. Shi Zonggu said, Priest Zhao, the falling Autumn City branch was annihilated within 2 days. Nobody was spared. After I went to investigate, I felt that there were many suspicions. I dare not act on my own and could only report it. Were the suspicions? Chuli asked. Shi Zonggu said, Their fatal injuries came from various sects' martial arts. It's difficult to determine which sect the culprit is from. Chuli frowned. How many people are there? I don't know. Shi Zonggu shook his head. It seems like 1. But it also seems like there are close to 10. How many people are in the branch? Chuli asked. Shi Zonggu said, Because the falling Autumn City branch is special, it's powerful. There are 10 grandmasters and 20 innate masters. They're all elite disciples. Chuli's face darkened. 10 grandmasters. 10 grandmasters were not inferior to an average sect, and they were all masters under the hands of a grandmaster, which was beyond the average sect. This time, the loss was indeed huge. Grandmasters were very difficult to kill. Even if they could not defeat them, they could still escape. Moreover, grandmasters had amazing intuition. They could escape when danger approached. Killing 10 grandmasters in one go was not something an average person could do. Shi Zonggu remained silent. Sun Mingyue said, This is no small matter. It's of great importance. I can only delay your isolated cultivation. You should go and take a look. Saint, are you afraid that the other 3 sects will join forces? Chuli asked. Back then, Radiance Clan, the predecessor of Gale City's Grand Gale branch, was annihilated overnight. It was said that the White Tiger sect and the other 3 sects had joined forces. Unfortunately, The Holy Church of Light could not find any evidence against them. They only suspected them and could not take revenge. This incident was similar to what happened to Radiant's clan. It seemed that the three sects had joined forces again. Sun Mingwe frowned. We've stopped fighting with the Qiu dynasty. We've lost 2 priests, and all sorts of evil people have appeared. Go and investigate which side they're from. Chuli nodded slowly. Yes, but I need the authority to act according to the situation. Chapter 32:22. The authority to make decisions on the spot was extremely powerful and was usually not given to others. Even a priest would not do so. Sun Mingwe was infuriated by this incident, and she had disturbed Chu Li's isolated cultivation. Feeling apologetic, she finally agreed to let Chu Li handle the matter, and she would not interfere in it. Chu Li fist saluted. I'll leave for Falling Autumn City immediately. The sooner the better. Sun Mingwe scoffed. If it's done. Chu Li nodded and turned to look at Shizongu. Shizongu said, Priest Zhao, I'll go with you. Chu Li shook his head. I'll go first. You can come after me. He nodded at Duing and left the Divine Light Basilica. His figure disappeared in the blink of an eye. Shizongu cursed in his heart, but did not show it on his face. He fist saluted Sun Mingwe. Saint, I'll take my leave now. I'll go after Priest Zhao. Falling Autumn City is very tense now. I'm afraid that they won't cooperate after Priest Zhao goes there. Sun Mingwe said, Alter leader, sure, keep your thoughts to yourself. You should know the severity of this matter. If you delay the progress, don't blame the church for being merciless. Yes. Shizongu's expression tensed up. I'll do my best to cooperate with Priest Zhao. That's good. I hope you're not being perfunctory. Sun Mingwe scoffed and waved her hand. Go. Shizongu bowed deeply and left with large strides. His heart shivered. Hisanus's eyes were like a torch. His little thoughts couldn't be hidden from her at all. He desperately used his light body technique to chase after him. He did not believe that the young man who had only cultivated for 2 to 3 years could be stronger than him. Even if he was, he could not be much stronger. He was famous for his divine movement and was an expert in light body technique. He could reach Falling Autumn City in a day. He did not stop rushing. He wanted to reach Falling Autumn City in advance. He wanted to see if Zhao Dai had the cheek to put on airs as a priest in front of him. He was so arrogant at such a young age. He was extremely dissatisfied with Chu Li. He felt that Chu Li did not respect him as an altar leader and was too arrogant. When Chu Li arrived at Falling Autumn City, he saw 30 corpses encased in ice. The entire Falling Autumn City branch was enveloped in ice, and only 5 disciples of the Holy Church of Light stood guard outside listlessly. Before Chu Li arrived at the branch, the omniscient mirror had already seen the injuries clearly from afar. Thus, he quietly entered and checked each of them with his hand. In the end, his face darkened and he left without saying a word. He appeared soundlessly in a restaurant in Falling Autumn City and stood outside the door of a room on the top floor, which was the 4th floor. He stood in the gorgeous corridor and knocked on the door. Come in. A graceful voice came from the room. Chu Li pushed the door open and entered. He gave a fist salute to the beautiful woman who was lying on the couch. Greetings, Senior Bai. Bai Feng from the Tian Luo sect was dressed in a white robe as she reclined lazily on the couch. She held a book in her hand as she looked at them lazily. A smile appeared on her exquisite and beautiful face. Oh, it's Priest Zhao who has graced us with his presence. Your presence brings light to our humble dwelling. She put down the book and stood up gracefully. Please take a seat. She walked to an embroidered stool and sat down gracefully. Chu Li sat on another embroidered stool as well. The two of them were only 2 steps apart. Bai Feng took the opportunity to pour him a cup of tea from the teapot on the short table and handed it to him. Why are you here? It's rare to see a dignified priest. Her bright eyes sparkled as she sized Chu Li up. She found it hard to believe that Zhao Dai had become a priest in such a short period of time. This was the first time something like this had happened in the Holy Church of Light. He was the person who had risen the fastest in the Holy Church of Light in thousands of years. She knew very well how difficult it was to be promoted to the position of a priest. Although it was due to the sudden death of two priests that he had the opportunity to become a priest so quickly, the position of a priest in the Holy Church of Light was one that they would rather not have. Currently, there was still an empty position of a priest because none of the followers below him could fulfill the requirements. Chu Li gave a fist salute and said, "Senior Bai, you don't have to tease me. I was just lucky." "Lucky?" Bai Feng giggled and shook her head. "A branch leader can be lucky, but a priest can't. What brings you here today?" "It's about the falling Autumn City branch," Chu Li said seriously. "The saint suspects that the incident with the Radiance clan has happened again. It's possible that your sect has joined forces with the other two sections." The smile on Bai Feng's beautiful face disappeared, and she frowned. Chu Li said, "The Holy Church of Light seems to have suffered a great loss after losing two priests in the battle with the Prophecy Pavilion. It's a great opportunity to weaken the Holy Church of Light. This is a great temptation." Bai Feng shook her head. "We didn't do this. Tian Luo's sect didn't participate in this." "Absolutely not." Bai Feng shook her head. "I would have known if they did, and I wouldn't have done such a thing. This is falling Autumn City. Wouldn't we be a laughing stock in front of the Qiu dynasty?" Chu Li sighed. "If Tian Luo's sect thinks so, the White Tiger sect might not. There's also the Flaming Sun sect." He shook his head. He felt that Bai Feng was telling the truth. Tian Luo's sect did not participate in this. "Has Miss Yu Ru come out of seclusion?" He changed the topic. Bai Feng smiled. "She's returned to Gale City." Chu Li said, "Gale City is more suitable for Miss Yu Ru. You can visit her if you're free," Bai Feng said. "She's quite accomplished in martial arts now." Chu Li nodded. Bai Feng muttered, "Priest Zhao, I don't think White Tiger sect and Flaming Sun sect are involved in this because it's unnecessary. No matter how weak the Holy Church of Light is, it's impossible for them to replace the Holy Church of Light as the strongest of the four sections." Chu Li smiled. "Senior Bai, you might think that way, but unfortunately White Tiger sect and Flaming Sun sect don't think so." "How about this? I'll invite them over to meet you," Bai Feng said. Chu Li fist saluted. "Thank you, senior." Bai Feng pursed her lips and smiled. "It's nothing. There's no need to thank me." Chu Li smiled and said nothing else. This was not a simple matter. It was a clear statement that Tian Luo's sect would stand on the Holy Church of Light side. He had first come to meet Bai Feng and reminisce about their old friendship. He had told her frankly and subtly pressured her so that he could achieve this goal. He wanted to rope in the Tian Luo sect so that the White Tiger sect and the Flaming Sun sect would not be able to cause any more trouble. In the future, the internal strife would also be quelled. "Servant," Bai Feng raised her voice. A delicate and pretty maid entered and stood by her side. Bai Feng gave her a few instructions, and the maid responded crisply before she left. Chu Li and Bai Feng talked about the battle between the Holy Church of Light and the Prophecy Pavilion. Before they could finish their tea, they heard footsteps and laughter from outside. "This is the first time we've been invited by Fairy Bai. We're flattered, haha." Amidst the laughter, two rough-looking men pushed the door open and strode in with big smiles on their faces. Bai Feng sat on a garden stool and fist saluted. "Clan Leader Zhang, Clan Leader Liang, let me introduce you to an important person." Both of them stared at Chu Li. Chu Li slowly stood up and fist saluted. He calmly said, "I'm Zhao Dai. Nice to meet you." "Zhao Dai." Their expressions changed. Chapter 32-23. Bai Feng chuckled. "Priest Zhao, this is Zhang Teng from the White Tiger sect and Liang Pingyuan from the Flaming Sun sect." Chu Li nodded. "Sorry for disturbing you, Priest Zhao. I'm sure both of you know why I'm here." "We don't." Liang Pingyuan shook his head. "Why is Priest Zhao looking for us?" Chu Li narrowed his eyes and looked at him. "I'm sure both of you have any news about our branch being destroyed? Or was it done by both of you?" "What do you mean?" Liang Pingyuan smiled. "We can't just say that it was us who did it, right?" Chu Li said, "My disciple's fatal injury was caused by the White Tiger sect's White Tiger Divine Fist and Flaming Sun Palm." "Impossible." Zhang Teng scoffed. Chu Li smiled faintly and shook his head. Clan leader Zhang, we wouldn't have killed our disciple and framed you, would we? The Holy Church isn't that senseless. We didn't have to go through so much trouble to deal with you. We know very well whether we did it or not. We definitely didn't do it. Liang Pingyuan said. Chu Li looked at him deeply. You know very well whether we did it or not. Priest Zhao, do you think we did it? Zhang Teng asked calmly. Chu Li shook his head. I don't think it was you. Why do you think so? Zhang Teng scoffed. Chu Li smiled. You don't have the guts to do it. How arrogant of you. Zhang Teng sneered. Do you really think that we won't dare to offend the Holy Church of Light just because you're the number one among the four sects? If you really dare to do it, you should know what we'll do. Chu Li shook his head. Unless the three sects join forces, you won't dare to do it. However, there's no proof to say that someone is impersonating your sections. What do you mean? Zhang Teng frowned. Priest Zhao, are you asking us to prove our innocence? Of course. Chu Li nodded slowly. The one who died was our disciple, and the injury was caused by your sect's martial arts. Logically speaking, I should have attacked you directly, but for the sake of the bigger picture, I wouldn't have done it so simply. Priest Zhao, who do you think did it? Zhang Teng asked. Brother Zhang. Liang Pingyuan frowned and glared at Zhang Teng. Zhang Teng did not look at him. He only stared at Chu Li. Who could have framed us? Chu Li said, You must have a lot of enemies, right? Moreover, to be able to display such power from two sects' martial arts, it's definitely not an ordinary sect. Zhang Teng frowned and said, Fuwang Zhao, please speak your mind. Chu Li smiled faintly. It's better not to say. Chu Li could not identify the culprit based on the disciple's injuries, so he knew that it was indeed the work of the White Tiger sect and the Flaming Sun sect. That was why he had asked the two of them to come over. Through the omniscient mirror, he could see through their thoughts and knew that they were not the culprits. Fortunately, they didn't have any treasures protecting them. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to see through their thoughts, and he would have to go through a lot of trouble. Zhang Teng frowned and remained silent. Liang Pingyuan could not help but snort coldly. Zhao Fuwang, this matter was not done by us, so it has nothing to do with us. Why do you need us to help investigate the matter of your disciple being killed? Chu Li looked at Liang Pingyuan and said calmly, Your sect's martial arts are not taught to outsiders, right? Of course not. Liang Pingyuan snorted. Chu Li said, Then why were they killed by the Flaming Sun Palm? If your martial arts were taught to outsiders, you should be able to find out who it was taught to. This is the easiest way to find the culprit. You're not even willing to help when it's convenient? Zhao Fuwang, this is not the attitude to ask for help. Liang Pingyuan said coldly. Chu Li looked at him calmly. Then should I kneel down and beg you, clan leader Liang? Zhang Teng said, This matter is indeed related to us. The culprit actually impersonated our two sects, which is a provocation. Even if Zhao Fuwang did not say it, we must find out who it is. He gave Liang Pingyuan a look. Liang Pingyuan suppressed his surging anger, snorted coldly, and said no more. He was extremely dissatisfied with Chu Li's domineering attitude. It was as if he had become a disciple of the Holy Church of Light and was ordered around by them at will. Chu Li nodded. Thank you, clan leader Zhang. I'll wait for your good news. Zhao Fuwang, just wait for the good news. Zhang Teng smiled. We will do our best and give Zhao Fuwang an explanation as soon as possible. All right. Chu Li nodded casually. Zhang Teng and Liang Pingyuan fist saluted and left. After leaving the restaurant and walking on the bustling street, Zhang Teng turned to look at Liang Pingyuan. Brother Liang, why do you have to go against him? He's so young, but he's so arrogant. Liang Pingyuan scoffed. Zhang Teng shook his head. He's young, but no matter what, he's still a priest of the Holy Church of Light. His status is indeed higher than ours. Not only should we not look down on him because of his young age, but we should also pay more attention to him. He sighed helplessly. Zhao Dai had become a priest at such a young age. Not to mention those outside the Holy Church of Light. Even those within the Holy Church of Light would not be convinced. This was human nature, and no one could avoid it. Because of this, it was easy to imagine that Zhao Dai would be ruthless to establish his authority and make others speechless. This Xiao Dea was not a kind person. Back then, he had killed everyone in Gale City. Now that he had become a priest, he would be even more ruthless. It was not wise to go against him head-on. Liang Pingyuan said, "He's too arrogant. He called us here and asked us to investigate the culprit. What kind of people are we? This matter needs to be investigated." He impersonated us and used our martial arts to kill a disciple of the Holy Church of Light. He's not an ordinary person. Zhang Teng's face darkened as he sighed. It's probably the reincarnation temple's doing. He framed us and provoked a civil war so that he could reap the benefits. Liang Pingyuan inhaled sharply. How vicious. If it weren't for Priest Zhao's patience, it would have been dangerous. Zhang Teng shook his head. If it were someone else, would they believe that our two sects are innocent? Maybe they didn't even ask us and directly attacked us. No matter how weak the Holy Church of Light is, it's not something we can fight against. Liang Pingyuan nodded slowly. The Radiance Clan incident was the Holy Church of Light's sore spot. The Holy Church of Light, which had always been proud, had been holding back their anger. As time passed, not only did their anger not dissipate, it became even more intense. This incident was exactly the same as what had happened to the Radiance Clan in the past. Seeing this, old and new grudges surged in their hearts. The Holy Church of Light was probably enraged and wanted to take revenge with interest. They had already made their move. Thinking of this, Liang Pingyuan felt a chill down his spine. If that were to happen, the entire martial arts world of the Great Li would be plunged into a sea of blood, and no one knew how many people would die. Do your best to investigate this matter. If you really can't find anything, don't force yourself. Zhang Teng said. He has already determined that we are not the murderers. He won't vent his anger on us just because he can't find the murderer. I'm just afraid that he's young and impetuous. Liang Pingyuan frowned. Zhang Teng said. He looks young and full of vigor, but his actions are calm and steady. To be able to become a law emperor, he's definitely not an ordinary person. Liang Pingyuan nodded. Through the omniscient mirror, Chu Li could clearly see what they were thinking. He frowned and pondered. He also suspected that the reincarnation temple was the doing of the martial arts world of the Qiu dynasty. Senior Bai, I'd like to rest here for 2 nights. Chu Li smiled. Bai Feng smiled sweetly. You're most welcome. Come with me. She got up and walked out of the house. She pushed open the door to the room next door and let him stay here. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.